All right, 1 2 1 2. We are live and direct once again. Big up to everybody tuning in. We will get started very soon. Big up to all the people. Um, Today should be a very interesting day. We'll let people get in. You know what I mean? So, as we do, is we let people get in to log in to the show. Those of you on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, we give people a couple minutes. So, in the meantime, between time, we do like to share some music. So let's go with Bunny, Kenya Eugene. Let's do it.
Is dedicated to all the kings and the queens and the children of the African diaspora. Always remember to keep the fire blazing. Always.
That's
Keep
Kenya
your
Eugene,
circle
y'all.
tight. Keep your meditation right.
Or we let people
Okay.
come
Queen Mary, where you going to bun? Queen Mary,
Tune
where
called
you
Bunny.
going to bun? Don't ask me nothing time. Just fetch the match and dine. Bars in jailhouses where we're going to burn. Don't ask me nothing time. Just fetch the match and dine. Bars in jailhouses where we're going to burn. Run it!
Blessed love, Kasha Pool. Yes, we're looking forward to today's show. Big up Shabaka, Ra, and Mani. Kenya Eugene.
In the name of the queens who fought before me, warrior kings, the ones who made the story. I sing praises no matter where I stand, no matter where I am. A night for a night. Gone are the days when we sit silent while they abuse I and I. Rebuke bad mind, jealousy and envy.
Real and come. Music nice, you have to play it twice, Listen to the lyrics.
Light a fire in them mind and them passion. Matilda run get Agnes. Tell her she must come. It's a revolution. Tell her she must come. Fetch the match and I burn it down. A knife for a knife. Gone are the days on which it's silent while they abuse I and I. Rebuke bad mind. Tell us see and then we have no place in clean heart. We burn it out. We burn. He said, she said. Burn it. Crab in a bucket mentality. We burn it. Social injustice and poverty. We burn it. Miseducation of the black man. We burn it. Hard work and determination. Make me. But I fight up nobody else. I said, Jah pick me. Yeah, I said, Jah pick me. The truth is the fire. Connect. In the road, find the truth. Keep it upside down. Nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. Set the place on fire, but Connect. Sit up, in the road, find the truth. Keep it upside down. Nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. Set the place on fire, burn the whole thing down. Connect. Sit up, Lord, it's a good boy.
Yeah, so that was a clip there from Kenya Eugene, What we're going to do is we're going to move on to some Bamboo Station. As people start trickling in, as we start today, where we cover Singapore. There's a lot of talk about Singapore. I've mentioned Singapore a few times in our conversation. It is used as the model for economic development. The many leaders who have been successful, they look at Singapore, and when a place is supposed to be doing well, they'll call it the Singapore of something. So Singapore of Africa, or they say the Singapore of the Caribbean, or the Singapore of this and that, would let you know that, Singapore is a standard, just like someone say the Michael Jordan of this or the Michael Jordan of that. They're letting you know that this person is quite excellent. in what they're doing because Michael Jordan is the standard. So Singapore becomes a standard in terms of nation building and economic excellence. And we would be remiss if we did not do an investigation into Singapore and what happened to Singapore, why it was so unique and why they were able to develop. And the key figure there is a man called Lee Kuan Yew, and we're going to get into that as well. So in the meantime, we love the music thing, all the conscious music, like to expose to the people just to set the tone. So just sit back. You got a nice something to drink, sip it while we're having this conversation. You rolling up something, roll up something. If you don't have anything like that, just kick back and just relax, But this should be a very good conversation. Yesterday, we talked about some very important things around the whole. Well, we really just built upon what we've been doing for the last couple of weeks, right? And dealing with Bitcoin, the concept of money. What is money? What are the characteristics of money as a unit of exchange, a unit of account, and also a store of value? We talked about that. We talked about the true definition of capitalism. We talked about what it means to be a winner, why we're addicted to winning. We looked at the Unabomber's manifesto. We've done this or that, went deep into music, and some of our great musicians who set the pace for us in terms of genius. So we've covered that. We've covered a lot. So anybody who wants to catch up, feel free to just go through the archives. You can go to YouTube and just go to the lives and go to those archives there. And you can look at the Facebooks. That information's there as well. And also on Twitter. Now, if we start playing music that's copyrighted, usually YouTube and Facebook, they like to play or hate. So Twitter doesn't have that type of censorship. So if you find that the stream gets cut off when we start playing any music and talking about music and analyzing music, just go to the Twitter. Just look for my name on Twitter, Heru Ofori-Atta, and we'll be there, congregating there, Let's get into sharing this real quick. There were some messages of some texts. Big up Gail Callwood. Bless up Gail Callwood. And let's see. We have, give me 1 second, y'all. 1 second. And we also have Leonard Robinson. And let's play this music. Let's get into this right now. There we go. So this is from the Great Bamboo Station. It's called Walk Your Mile. One of my favorite songs from them. Check it out. Virgin Islands every time,
This is a new song from our new album called Children of Exodus. Encouraging you to support the little things, little stores that support you, Our breath of life is truth. This is a true story, the story of our lives. Some man walk hills and valleys, some man grow up in the alley. Road wise them know things ain't no funny, cause all the while the city's still a grow. You walk your mind, you walk your mind, you walk your mind. And so they build and they build and they build and don't give a damn, And we live and we live and we live in the squalor of the filling the jails, the slums, the ghettos we call apartments. When last you see one of them in a little store still, Hey, little rose, growing in the ghetto way. Every day, hustle is the matter. Where developers can get back loans to get richer, how far we born. So go be a teacher before you have a baby. Go be a doctor before you are Mercedes. Go be an astronaut to get high. Cause without us, the city's still around. You are mine. You are mine. You are mine. You are mine. Hey, little rose, growing in the ghetto way. Every day, hustle is the matter. When developers can get back loans to get richer, how far we born. So go be a you have a baby. Go be a doctor before you are Mercedes. Go be an astronaut to get high. Cause without us, the city's still around. You are mine. Welcome on. You are mine. You are mine. You got to walk your mind. You are mine. Your mind. You are hills and valleys, some man that grow up in the alley. Rude boys them know, things ain't no valley. Cause the only one, the city's still a grow. You are your man, your man. You are your man. You are your man. It's time to walk your mind. You walk your mind. You walk your mind. You walk your mind. Build and they build and they build and they build and they live and we live and we live and we live and we live and they build and they build and they build and they build and they and we We live and we live and we live and we live and ooh, feel that way, live that way, feel that way, live that way, feel that way, live that way, feel that way. You walk your mind, walk your mind, you walk your mind. You are your mind. Take time to walk your mind. You are your mind. Walk your mind. You are your mind. You are your mind. So we go.
All right. Yeah, man, roots reggae, you know, the music of a sane people, music with sanity, you know? Yeah. So that was Kenya Eugene Bunnett and also Bamboo Station with Walk Your Mile, both coming from the U.S. Virgin Islands. Bamboo Station mainly St. Thomas, and Kenya Eugene coming from St. Croix, you know? So there's definitely something in the water in the VI. And these are world-class people, you know? So just happy to play their music for you all as we get started. So let's muscle up, y'all, and let's get into this topic. So here's the reality. The reality is that when you are talking about a subject and you believe that you would like to engage or that your community, your group, your people need to engage in a certain activity, it would behoove you to study people who've been successful in that activity and know who they are and find out what they've done and look at what you call case studies. All of us who tuned in have heard people at one time or another use the term nation building, right? That, you know, we need to be engaged in nation building or, you know, a nation builder, or this is nation building, or, you know, we've heard that term. But very rarely have we then gone into deep case studies on nation building and who the nation builders are and were. And really, the best example of nation building that we had in terms of efficiency was what happened with Singapore over a course of just 2 decades. And it was in large part due to a man called Lee Kuan Yew. I've mentioned this before in different lives that I've done, that Singapore used to be a malaria-infested swamp and also a fishing village. That's what it was. Because of one man who had a vision and the planning and the understanding, Singapore now is a world leader in GDP, gross domestic product, per capita income, standard of living, no crime, cleanliness, organization of government, lack of corruption, ease of doing business, and it goes on and on and on and on. In fact, Singapore is a country that I will visit within the next year or two and literally just live there for a few months and learn, really be humbled and learn. When I went to Rwanda, after I heard all of the beautiful things about Rwanda and what they've done to transform the country from a place that was genocide central, where, you know, many people were killed, to where they're at now, where it's a basically no crime area, clean. I found out that the leader, Paul Kagame of Rwanda, when they won the war against the genocide of the Tutsis, one of the first things that he did was he went to Singapore and he studied their system there, and he then went along to innovate and implement many of the things that were done in Singapore. Another leader who I have seen put in work in terms of transforming a country in a short amount of time is Nayib Bukele out of El Salvador. I've talked about him, and he was the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender. And from their Bitcoin purchases from a few years ago, when I went to El Salvador about 2 years ago. When I went, Bitcoin was around $20,000 per Bitcoin. Now it's between 60 and 70,000, depending on what day of the week you look at it. So you've seen Bitcoin do a 3 to 3.5x increase since that time. Well, because of the investment that not only have they allowed people to store their money in Bitcoin, but also buy things in Bitcoin so that the vendors and the store keepers and the entrepreneurs can actually get their income in Bitcoin and then save in Bitcoin also, along with employees getting paid in Bitcoin. Now the money you're saving is not depreciating in value, it's actually increasing in value. The El Salvadorian government has made several purchases of Bitcoin in the millions of dollars since the last 2 years. And because Bitcoin's rise, they have actually made close to $100 million in profit since the last 2 years. Whereas other people have put their money in other things, other governments have put their money in other things, and those things have depreciated in value and certainly have not risen in value as much as Bitcoin has. Now, the question is, Nayib Bukele, what did he study? And he also studied Singapore. So it seems to be a running trend of those who are serious about nation building. They go to the people who have been the most successful, right? If you want to become a world-class swimmer, you better study Michael Phelps. Find out what his workout routine was. Find out what his training routine was. Find out what his diet was. Find out what his times were, right? If you're really serious. If you're not serious, you'll just talk about it. And I think that many people in our communities have not proven to be serious, because if you mention the name Lee Kuan Yew, many will just look at you like they don't know who you're talking about. But if you're interested in nation building, you would have necessarily found out about Lee Kuan Yew, because he is one of the great nation builders in history. What I want to do is I want to take you all through a conversation of some videos that we're going to look at, so you can see Singapore from the past. You can see Singapore now in terms of what it looks like, and you can understand some of their policies. You can understand a little bit about Lee Kuan Yew. You know, this is not going to be exhaustive. It's for you to do your homework, right? But what I want to do is I want to talk about, you know, he is known in many circles as the greatest nation builder ever in modern times. So that means that it would behoove us. It is necessary for us to actually look and see who this guy is, Lee Kuan Yew. What I want to do is I want to start the conversation with a man named Charlie Munger. So those of you who study finance and money would know who Charlie Munger is. He is the partner of Warren Buffett in the investment business, Berkshire Hathaway, of which Warren Buffett has been known to be, you know, the richest man for many years. So what I want to do is I want to let you all hear what he has to say about Lee Kuan Yew. All right. So let me play a little something about Lee Kuan Yew and Charlie Munger. So there's a nice video I want to play. There's a couple things that he had to say about Lee Kuan Yew. Now, the reason why this is really important is because you want to know what other people who have been successful in the field of finance has to say about him. Just like if you were interested in Michael Jordan, one of the best things to understand the depth and how important Michael Jordan was and how great he was is to hear what other basketball players who were great basketball players have to say about Michael Jordan. So if you are interested in somebody, find out what their peers or people who are very successful have to say about a particular person. So let's listen to hear what this guy, Charlie Munger, has to say. All right. So he's asked a question. I'm going to play this video. I'm going to play this video here, and we're just going to set the table. All right. So this is Charlie Munger being asked about Lee Kuan Yew. Check it out.
My question is in regards to Lee Kuan Yew, and you've on several occasions spoken about the economic miracle that is Singapore and then how it was transferred on by Deng Xiaoping to China. What are your thoughts about India that's going through a similar change with the Prime Minister who also idolizes these people and wants to create a similar sort of situation? I'd like your thoughts on that.
Well, that's a very intelligent question. And I'm not saying all the other questions weren't. And I regard Lee Kuan Yew may have been the best nation builder that ever lived. He took over an malarial swamp with no assets, no natural resources, no nothing, surrounded by a bunch of Muslims who hated him. In fact, he was being spat out by the Muslim country. They didn't want a bunch of damn Chinese in their country. That's how Singapore was formed as a country. The Muslims spat it out. And so here he is, no assets, no money, no nothing. People are dying of malaria, lots of corruption. And he creates in a very short time, by historical standards, modern Singapore. It was huge success. It was such a success, there's no other precedent in the history of the world that is any stronger. Now, China's more important because they're more Chinese, but you can give Lee Kuan Yew a lot of the credit for creating modern China, because those pragmatic communist leaders, they saw a bunch of Chinese that were rich when they were poor, and they said, "The hell with this." Remember, the old communist said, "I don't care whether the cat is black or white, I care whether it catches mice." And he wanted some of the success that Singapore got, and he copied the playbook. So I think the communist leadership that copied Lee Kuan Yew was right. I think Lee Kuan Yew was right. And of course, I have two busts of somebody else in my house. One is Benjamin Franklin, and the other is Lee Kuan Yew. So wow. That's what I think of it. So I think now you turn to India.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. You all get the point of this guy, Charlie Munger, he's not someone to give compliments to anybody. He's one of those grumpy old men, but he is a billionaire many times over. He understands business, finance. You know, he is Warren Buffett's partner. He died recently at close to 100 years old. But the guy was, after Warren Buffett, consistently one of the richest men on the planet. And I've listened to Charlie Munger lectures and interviews. That was very heavily during my period of really discovering what I needed to do in terms of money and understanding money. And what I did was I re-engineered success by studying the people who've been successful with money. He said that Lee Kuan Yew is one of the greatest nation builder that ever lived. and he has a bust of him in his house. Because Lee Kuan Yew put in that work, y'all. And what I'm saying is that it is very indicative that a lot of us have not gotten anywhere with nation building because Lee Kuan Yew is not the top name in our vocabulary when it comes to nation building. So what I wanted to do today was I wanted to break that cycle. I wanted everyone who watches me to be clear on who Lee Kuan Yew was, what he did, and Singapore, that you don't just wake up in the morning and find a country to be the cleanest country in the world just like that. There's something that happened. And inquiring minds would want to know what happened here that didn't happen in other places. What are the ingredients to make a society like this that was once a swamp infested with malaria that now looks the way it looks? And some people may not know what Singapore looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a little video of, Singapore, and we do a little clip of Lee Kuan Yew as well. But let me do a little thing here in terms of Singapore from the last last few decades, right? So it's going to just be a panorama of Singapore, and I'm going to show you what it looks like now and what makes it so unique in terms of what was able to be pulled off and the policies that they had in place, okay? And like I said, Rwanda has followed this, and it has achieved results. El Salvador is following this model, and it is achieving results. Therefore, we need to know what this is. This needs to be some of the top conversations that we're having. And so I didn't want to have this conversation too early, but the people from the beginning, you're definitely prepared for this conversation. So this is a panorama of Singapore from 1965 to 2001. So you get to look at the pictures in terms of the development in a short amount of time, okay? So this is 60 years about. In the last 50-something years, 56 years of a country, and you see its evolution. So check this out, y'all. So you see what that looked like from 65. You see the buildings. And as a matter of fact, this little setup here, many places, there are some Caribbean islands that you go to, and some of the downtown areas look just like this. They look like this. Still stuck in the 60s. And in certain African towns too that you can go to, and they look like this, right? As a matter of fact, there's a place in St. Thomas, there's an area that still looks like this. There's a place in Rosso Dominica, the downtown, still looks like this. There's different places you can go and you can still see St. Croix, you can still see buildings that still look like this, right? So that's 1970. This is 1980. You start seeing a dramatic change. This is after Lee Kuan Yew started putting some things into effect. It gotten some time to be more stable as development starts happening. This is 1990. Look what we have. Fishing village don't look bad right there, right? Look at the transformation of a fishing village. Now we're at 2005. Not bad for a fishing village. Not bad for a fishing village. Fishing village looking nice. Fishing village looking real nice right there. That's nice right there too. Beautiful. We're not done. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. Now look at that. Not bad for a fishing village. I keep saying it. Look at that. That's beautiful, y'all. What y'all just saw, that doesn't happen by accident. All right? That does not happen by accident. It happens with planning. It happens with organization. It happens with vision, and it happens with leadership. Lowell says he's ashamed. He's now learning about Lee Kuan Yew. That's the dopest fishing village ever. Yeah. What I'm saying is that the conversations we've been having is not reflective of people who are actually serious about nation building. Because if we were really serious about nation building, we all would have known about Lee Kuan Yew. That's the point that I'm trying to make, is that when you start dealing with things from a practical level and the rubber meets the road, there are certain questions you're going to ask, and there are certain people that you're going to find out about. But if you have no intentions, if you have no intentions to really build a country, you're not going to know about people like Lee Kuan Yew because you're not really that serious. You're just talking. And so a lot of our conversations over the years has been rhetoric, right? A lot of it has been rhetoric and not really something that is focused on actually making things happen. Because like I said, if you are focused on making things happen in terms of really nation building, you would know who Lee Kuan Yew is. Those people who are serious about building countries and development, they study Lee Kuan Yew, y'all. Okay? If you want to become a world-class chess player, there are certain people you're going to study. You're going to study Magnus Carlsen. You're going to study Bobby Fischer. You're going to study, any of the legends and the grand masters of chess. So what I'm saying is that if you're going to really be serious about nation building, you go to the person who's most successful in nation building. It really is just, it really is that simple, right? But an indication that we haven't been serious is that many people are just hearing about Lee Kuan Yew for the first time. That's the point that I'm trying to make. So let's look at some more videos. Let's see how good this is. This one is about Lee Kuan Yew himself. So let's just see. It's about 5 minutes long. I will make it 1.25 times speed to have us go through it. And then we'll go through Singapore itself, a little history on Singapore. It is very important for all of us to be conversant on this, right? This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where the adults show up. This is where the people who are serious show up. We start looking at success and we want to simply reverse engineer success. That is the best way to get to success, is to reverse engineer it, which means that you go to the people who have been successful and you work your way backwards. So let's look and see what they're saying here.
Renowned to have the world's best infrastructures, education, and economy. Yes, you may have guessed it right. This is Singapore. And according to a 2013 global report by The Economist, it is ranked the first best country to be born in Asia and the 6th in the entire world. Credit Suisse's Global Wealth Report of 2021 even stated that Singapore's millionaire list would grow a total of 61.9% from 270,000 in 2020 to over 437,000 in 2025. This is even after knowing that there's a global crisis going on around the world, wrecking economies one after the other. But all present and future aside, how did Singapore come to be so rich? Well, it might be because of one man, and this person goes by the name of Lee Kuan Yew. He is renowned for transforming a tiny island nation from a third world to a first. Born on September 6, 1923, to parents who are third-generation Straits Chinese, or commonly known as Perenikans. Growing up, Lee and his family faced several challenges, mainly because of finances, but his parents helped pull through. By 1935, Lee had attended Raffles Institute, known as Singapore's oldest school. At first, he had trouble studying, but eventually, he improved his grades and even topped the junior and senior Cambridge examinations. Because of this, he was granted a scholarship to study at Raffles College, but his studies were disrupted because his school was converted into a medical facility due to the coming of World War II. During the war, he had worked as an English editor for the Japanese propaganda department and later did a lot of side jobs and even one time had a business path of producing a stationary gum called Stickfuss. After the war, he went on to the United Kingdom to pursue his educational ambition. There, he showed brightly amongst other students, and at one point, gaining the Fitzwilliam Whitlock Prize. By 1950, Lee would head back to Singapore and would head up and encounter the world of law, entering a law firm run by the co-founder of the pro-British and colonial Progressive Party. It is also where Lee had to play a role in the 1951 Legislative Council election as an election agent. Fast forward to 4 years later, in November 1954, after several involvements and meeting with politics, journalism, and running in and out of several court trials, Lee had finally inaugurated the People's Action Party, along with several prominent names. Throughout the next years, Lee's life had embarked into the world of politics. With his party being formed less than a year, they had joined the 1955 general election. Brave and tough for being only months old, surprisingly, even though that it is relatively new, they had won 3 seats already. And to many surprises, Lee Kuan Yew was one of them, along with one of his running mates, Lim Chin Sayong, who would also become the youngest assemblyman to be ever elected to office at the age of 22. Although not every day did they see success. Throughout until 1959, several members of Lee's party were detained, imprisoned, and had gone through rough paths. They were criticized for inciting riots, and several were viewed as a communist. But they were able to overcome such challenges, and on the 5th of June 1959, Lee and his cabinet were sworn into the office of Singapore, where Lee Kuan Yew became the prime minister. Throughout Lee's life in office, he had transformed Singapore into an economic miracle. When he first came into office, Singapore had a tiny gross national product per capita of only $1,240 into over $18,437 by 1990. He was able to snowball Singapore into a world of its own. He oversaw the creation of several state-of-the-art infrastructures, helped Singapore's workforce grow into a world class, and create one of the world's best and cleanest governments ever. What's most amazing to note is how Lee had already realized way back that Singapore had its limitations. It was a small country with so little population back then. His policy to pull talented people helped forge Singapore's economic success.
Keep that in mind, his policy to pull talented people. Remember, I showed you all the policy of El Salvador to pull in talented people, and then that's the passport program that they are committing $5 billion to bring in scientists, engineers. And the list was a specific list of people that the president of El Salvador wanted. These are people going to build the country and help increase the status of the country. In Rwanda, they have the same thing, citizenship through special talents. We talked about that. And they all got it from Lee Kuan Yew, by the way.
With the unemployment rate dropping from over 13.5% in the year he was sworn in office to only 1.7% by 1990. He had certainly created Singapore from a developing nation to one of the most developed nations, not only in Asia, but to the rest of the world. Several people have said that the best way Singapore grew was how Lee attracted foreign investments. He could get these Fortune 500 companies around the world to set up operations in Singapore. Lee even established the country as an international financial center and got all of these prominent banks in the country. He was able to do all of this because of how he and his team got Singapore's economic policies right, and even transformed the country's international image of being the Garden City. Anyway, what do you think about Lee Kuan Yew's life? Share with us your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to leave us a like and follow us for more amazing videos. Thanks for watching.
So that was just a little overview of Lee Kuan Yew. Didn't go that deep, but it said some few key things: that he attracted talent into the country. He also made it attractive to banks to move there. And so if you want to get to the money, you have the banks in your country. And so he's just using first principles thinking, and he was able to transform that country the way that you all have seen the transformation. Let's go into Singapore a little bit more. There are a couple documentaries here, about 15 minutes each. Let's just see which ones that we can information from for our analysis. So I'm going to go with this one. If it starts to get stale, I'll go to the next one, but I'm glad that everyone is tuning in, and I hope that you all are enjoying this, because I know I am. Yeah, please like the stream, share it with any friends you may have, and also comments. Says Healing Beauty says, I learned about him in 2015 through college, the Blue Zones book. Also, please share with someone, yes. And also, there is another message through the Blue Zones. Okay, yeah. So let's get into a little bit more information about Singapore. And so nation building is not like it's not pretty. There's a lot of tough choices you've got to make. And when you're dealing with security, the first thing for investment is that anyone investing in your country needs to know that their money is going to be secure. So you've got to establish security. You've got to establish rule of law. You're going to have to be harsh. You're going to have to treat criminals like complete anathema, because you're trying to clean up your country. You're also looking for people to execute policies around environmental cleanliness, because you cannot have people come to your country who want to invest and then they're seeing filth all over the place. So that's one of the things about Singapore in terms of their rules. They're very strict about littering. As a matter of fact, if you're caught littering, you can get caned in that country. And caned is that the police have a cane and they'll beat you with the cane publicly if you are caught littering. And for instance, chewing gum is illegal in Singapore. You can't even come into the country with chewing gum. They will give you a fine if you show up at the airport trying to get into the country with chewing gum. So they're not playing any games with anybody. And like I said, it's not an accident when you see a country go from A to Z within 20, 30 years. Okay. So what I want to do now is let's look at a couple videos, and we'll select the best information that we can from each video. And then I'll also go through the, I know people have been asking me about my curation of my Twitter. So we'll go through that as well so that you all be able to see some of the people that I follow and why I get, information early from serious people. All right, here we go. So this is called The Singaporean Dream, A Journey of Economic Miracle, History of Economic Transformation, okay? It's called Was Popular History, WAS Popular History. So let's check it out. I'll speed it up.
Singapore. The first thing that comes to mind is probably an economic miracle.
Real income.
What do you know about Singapore? The first thing that comes to mind is probably an economic miracle. The explosive growth of industry and high-tech production. In just 25 years, the state has completely transformed from a poor backward country with zero resources into one of the most developed economies in the world, a city-state without crime, with perfectly clean streets, as if it popped out of a utopian novel or dystopian one. In this new episode of How It Was, we will talk about the Singapore economic miracle. You will learn how the country's authorities, in just 25 years, managed to create an industry from scratch, destroy the local mafia, force all citizens to learn English and obey the law unquestioningly, even if this law requires giving up chewing gum. And most importantly, you'll learn at what cost the ideal city was created. But first, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new episodes. Singapore is a city-state in Southeast Asia. It occupies several dozen islands separated by a narrow strait from Malaysia. The country covers an area of less than 730 square kilometers. Compare it with the territory of Kiev, which is 839 kilometers squared. The history of Singapore can be divided into three periods. The first one lasted from ancient times to 1819. For several centuries, Singapore was divided among the dynasties from what is now modern Malaysia and Indonesia. For a while, the small island territory acquired an important commercial status as an international port appeared. But after it had been burned down by the Portuguese in the early 17th century, Singapore was forgotten for a long time. The second period is associated with the rule of the British Empire. In 1819, the East India Trading Company built a port on the islands and named it Singapore. The future Prime Minister of the country will remark that at the time it was a fishing village with 120 inhabitants who lived from gathering, fishing and piracy. Soon, Singapore became part of the British colony, Straits Settlements. The British actively invested in the infrastructure of the new colony by building railways, overpasses that connected the islands with the continent, creating educational institutions and increasing the trade turnover. The British period lasted until the middle of the 20th century. During World War II, Singapore was occupied by Japan. After the war, the colony disintegrated, and in 1959, Singapore gained independence. At first, the new authorities tried to merge with ethically and culturally close Malaysia. The United States existed for several years, but then Singapore separated and became an independent country. What could the new country boast of after gaining sovereignty? Virtually nothing. Singapore had neither fossil fuels nor highly skilled population, army or industry. Even good drinking water wasn't available. It had to be imported. What it had was crime, unemployment, slum.
They had to import drinking water, y'all. It's like they had to import it. That's crazy.
And the threat of annexation from its neighbors. Everything changed when Lee Kuan Yew became prime minister and led the country from 1959 to 1990.
See, they say everything changed. And so what I've gotten to see through my travels, y'all, is that many times it can take one person, one leader to change the whole direction of a country. I've seen it. And so when I see a lot of these countries that are basically failed states, you definitely can go straight to the leadership. A country can only go as far as the skills and the imagination of its leadership. So clearly he was skilled and he had a great imagination. Most of these leaders of countries around the world, they never even thought that their country would be greater than those who colonized it. So what I'm saying is that there's many African leaders who never even in their mind have dreamt that their country could be or should be than Britain or France or whoever colonized them. And clearly, Lee Kuan Yew had a great imagination and a great level of skill and dedication to the vision of making Singapore hurdle over all these other countries. And he did it in a very, very specific way. We'll go over some of the policies as well. So we'll continue.
He set an ambitious task to achieve perfection, but an ideal state needed ideal citizens. Therefore, the development of high-tech manufacturing in Singapore went hand in hand with the forming of new and unique people.
So listen to that. One of the ways that they were going to get out of their economic problem is to deal with high-tech manufacturing. What do I keep saying about manufacturing, y'all? This is the only way that you get out of your economic mess, is through entrepreneurship and mainly through manufacturing. Because if you don't produce products that you need and want, you're going to buy them from someone else, which means that your money is going to be transferred over for someone else's goods. You're going to be demanding other people's goods, and all of your income is going to go towards another person's economy. So he dealt with it from first principles, thinking of, we're going to do high-tech manufacturing as the world is going in a technological way, computers and all of these high-tech things, and you know, that he saw from the 80s to the 90s. He just projected in the future and said, listen, we need to be engaged in high-tech manufacturing, not low-tech manufacturing, but high-tech manufacturing, so that we stay on top and we are then seen as some of the greatest manufacturers. And China actually ended up taking that idea from him, as Charlie Munger pointed out, and really his ideas were responsible for making China right now as a world power, because they took from his playbook. His only problem, Lee Kuan Yew's only problem, is he doesn't have the population that China has. Singapore doesn't have that population that China has. So China was able to become a juggernaut, taking his policies and using it on 1 billion people. Okay. Now, like I said, this is not a job that's for the faint of heart, because you've got to essentially take a people who've never been organized before. I'm talking about your citizenry, who've never been organized and never have had what you would call a national mission. And you've got to reform them and revolutionize their minds for them to actually become different people. What you've got to do is a couple things. You've got to welcome other people who are already ready and trained and ready to build your country. And you've got to nurture your people along so that they become these people as well. So there's reforms you have to make in the educational system. You can't use the colonial education because it's not there for you to solve your own problems. It's for you to learn about the colonizer's history and then to solve the colonizer's problem. So he had a big deal in having to, or a big job in having to change the people and the culture of the people in Singapore. You've also got to deal with the issue of population growth versus economic expansion. And many ways that people deal with this can be ugly. You'll have like a one-child policy for a certain amount of time. That leads to problems. But if you're trying to grow your economy, one of the ways, just like in your own personal expenses, in terms of your budget, either you stop spending or you make more money, right? So in this case, whenever you try and develop a society, particularly from scratch to a technologically advanced society, you're going to have to increase income so that people have better lives and make more money. There's steps to do that, but then you've also got to, for a small amount of time at least, also control the growth of your population, because you're starting to deal with per capita income. So the more people, but there's less money, there's more poverty. So the less people and more money, people start getting a share of the pie. So these things are very serious. And the measures that you have to take sometimes are very draconian. When it comes to things like justice around corruption, there's going to be wholesale finding people guilty, being suspicious of people who are ministers working with you. We're going to go over this tomorrow and what's happening in El Salvador. I'm going to play you all a speech. It's going to blow you all away of what just happened in El Salvador. It'll blow you all away, but I'll wait till tomorrow. But even in dealing with corruption, there's people who've been corrupt for so long that if you try to stop them from being corrupt, they'll try to kill you, because corruption has become a way of life. So now you've got to have a security apparatus in place, because if you're going to change a country for the ministers and the people in power, to stop stealing from the country, those same people are going to try to kill you. So you've got to have a serious security apparatus where now all of a sudden you've got a network of spies. You've got to have a police force. You have to have all of this in place to be able to change a country that was not performing. So this is not an easy task. You're going to have a lot of people around you, even family members, who want to get you out of there, because in these types of countries, you have a very small population that's not developing the country. They're stealing from everyone so that they're the wealthy people, but they're idiots and fools because they're stealing from an underdeveloped country. You never steal from an underdeveloped country. If you're going to steal, you steal from a developed country. So these are the people who are going to get in your way, people who don't have any vision. And so you've got to do a lot of draconian things. So it's not a walk in the park to transform a corruption-filled, swamp, malaria-infested fishing village where people who are in charge are happy with the status quo, and you're the visionary who's going to take care of business. Well, you better have a lot of other things together, because to transform a stubborn people who are used to their ways, it takes a lot, yo. So let's go back to what they're saying. And we can also, like I said, we can also look at some other videos as well.
Citizens. Therefore, the development of high-tech 59 to 1990. He set an ambitious task to achieve perfection, but an ideal state needed ideal citizens. Therefore, the development of high-tech manufacturing in Singapore went hand in hand with the forming of new and unique people.
The forming of new and unique people. This is what you're going to have to do for your country to be able to compete. Your people are going to have to be a new people and a unique people. What I mean by that is you should listen to Elon Musk's recent interview about China. And he said that the reason why China is winning is because he's never been to a country with so many talented and at the same time hardworking people. So those are two things you have to have. You have to have the talent. In other words, people have been trained in technical fields, and they have to be hardworking. He said that he's never seen that type of population ever, besides when he's in China, or even maybe India is coming second. But he's just talking about the work ethic of people. I mean, I remember I seen a meme the other day. If I could find it, I'll show it to y'all. And it shows Sunday in Africa and Sunday in China. And on top, it has Sunday in Africa. It has all these people weeping and wailing in church. And then Sunday in China, it shows people in a factory pumping out products. You know, so which society is going to be able to dominate which society when you start looking at things that way, right? All of this is scientifically predictable. It's mathematically predictable what people spend their hours doing versus what another group spends their hours doing will tell you the quality of the people that you're dealing with and who's ready to compete in a competitive world of technological and engineering advancement and people who aren't. It's really that simple. So let's go back to the video and let's just hear what he's saying.
And good drinking water wasn't available. It had to be imported. What it had was crime, unemployment, slums, and the threat of annexation from its neighbors. Everything changed when Lee Kuan Yew became prime minister and led the country from 1959 to 1990. He set an ambitious task to achieve perfection, but an ideal state needed ideal citizens. Therefore, the development of high-tech manufacturing in Singapore went hand in hand with the forming of new and unique people. First Prime Minister of the Republic of Singapore, 1959 to 1990. Education, London School of Economics and Political Science, Fitzwilliam College at Cambridge University. Profession, lawyer. Role models, Winston Churchill, Charles de Gaulle, Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping. Governance principle. Excellence is the key word of Singapore's recipe for survival in this harsh world. In the middle of the 20th century, Singapore was home to a diverse ethnic culture.
Listen to what he said there. This is important. This is his philosophy. Excellence is the key word of Singapore's recipe for survival in this harsh world. Could kind of stop the stream right here. Excellence is the key word of Singapore's recipe for survival in this harsh world. Everybody watching, I want y'all to be clear on something. Everybody watching, I want you, this, as it goes for Singapore, it goes for countries and it also goes for individuals. Many of you tuned in are entrepreneurs. Please understand this. You're living in a competitive world. No one owes you anything, not even your family members. They don't owe you to support your business. I've talked about this before. Your main concern is not getting people to support you or being upset that people aren't supporting you in your business. Anytime I hear somebody complaining about not getting supported in their business, it lets me know that they're focused on the wrong thing. What you're to be focused on is excellence. That means that can your product compete in the world market? If you're making a drink, could it compete with the packaging of drinks being sold at Whole Foods? Could it compete with drinks being sold at any of these big retailers? That's the question that you have to ask yourself. Can you compete through excellence? If the answer is no, your problem is not having family support you, but your problem is a problem of excellence. Because guess what's going to happen when you have achieved excellence? Not only will your family members support you, they will brag about you, because people love to be attached to success. Understand that if you are churning out something that is solving people's problems and you're doing it in an excellent way, money is just a byproduct of that. Money is just the energy of your activity. So you will get more money and you will get more energy if you are indeed excellent. And this is what Lee Kuan Yew realized. That's why when you go to Singapore, there's no trash on the ground, y'all. It's the cleanest country in the world. That's why they call Rwanda and Kigali the Singapore of Africa, because Rwanda is known as the cleanest country in Africa. So cleanliness has been synonymous with Singapore for many, many decades now. They're not playing any games with anyone, because guess what? If you make their country filthy, look what you're doing. You are messing up their bag, their money, because no one wants to invest in filth. So that's the first thing that they saw. And many of these leaders would do well to deal with that. Because if I'm a business person, why would I invest in your country if you can't even clean up your streets? If you can't solve your waste management issue, I'm not going to invest in your country. So why would you, as a head of state, not invest in waste management and cleaning up your country, but you got the nerve to try to invite people to your country? Why would you invite people to your house and your house got trash laying all around it? And then ask the same people who visit your filthy house to invest in you. This is what's going on in many of these countries. They've got leadership that has no shame. You've got leadership that doesn't even want to clean the roads between the airport and the government building where you're going to have the meeting. So that you've got investors from Japan flying into your country, investors from wherever flying into your country, and you haven't bothered to clean up the roads. Even just the roads from the airport to where they're going to be staying or where they're going to be having the business talks. Lee Kuan Yew saw that very clearly. He said, one of the first things we've got to do is we've got to clean up this country so it becomes something attractive for investment. Excellence. Let's get back into it.
In the middle of the 20th century, Singapore was home to a diverse ethnic, cultural, and religious population: the Chinese, Malaysians, Indians, and Indonesians. To begin with, Lee Kuan Yew decided to unite such a Babylon by the most apparent social cement: a language. Lee Kuan Yew himself belonged, in his own words, to the bourgeois people with an English education. He was born to an English-speaking Singaporean family, his parents were of different Chinese nationalities, and English became the common language for them. Many years later, after he received a brilliant European education and became head of Singapore.
Of course, you can see this guy is, given the narrative, he's very skewed towards Britain. He's probably British himself. He says a brilliant British education. So, I mean, you always listen to the person who's doing this and just try to, determine what their bias is. But you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You take what you can get that would be useful for your analysis.
Or he would make English one of the state languages and make every Singaporean learn it. The transition to English.
So what he did was he transitioned from people just because it was a hodgepodge of languages: Chinese, there's Indonesians there's Malaysians there. Different groups in Singapore, and he made English one of the languages because he saw that English was the lingua franca for the world. in terms of business. All the business documents, business contracts internationally are usually done in English. So he decided that he was going to make sure that his people would be able to compete in the world of international transactions, particularly based on the plans that he was going to have. So he wasn't emotional about people learning English. He just saw that the English empire had spread its tentacles to the rest of the world, and that if you want to be able to compete, you're going to have your people master English. Just like what's going on right now with a lot of people from America going to China and mastering Mandarin, because they understand that Chinese are taking over in terms of the world economy, and that if you want to be able to compete, you should learn how to speak some form of Chinese, mainly Mandarin. And so that's happening right now. Mandarin is being offered as a second language, or as a language course to be taken in many universities now as well, because they understand that these languages follow economics. So the strongest economy in the world will have the most people trying to learn that language, because it's about incentivizing yourself. And so he saw that early. And so when you go to Singapore now, everyone speaks English, and business people are comfortable being there.
English as a common language was not abrupt. The Prime Minister believed that the reform would lead to rebellion. Therefore, the international language of communication was introduced gradually, and at the same time, teaching in native languages was being promoted. These changes took 30 years, and as a result, English replaced Chinese as the language of study at Singapore's universities. At the same time,
All right, so English replaced Chinese. Interesting.
and the Prime Minister believed that erasing ethnic, linguistic, and cultural differences would be a bad plan. People would resist such policies, and ethnic differences will only increase. In addition, Lee Kuan Yew was convinced that fanatics, extremists, and chauvinists are made from people who know only one language. That's why he wanted to build a strong, united nation on the basis of traditions and centuries-old wisdom of different peoples. Lee Kuan Yew was wary of only one culture, Islamic. The Prime Minister was worried about the growing isolation of the Muslim community. Another big problem, he believed, was that Muslims aren't able to live in a society without restrictions. They can't accept food from a neighbor or enter into a mixed marriage. The Singaporean authorities are trying to fight with manifestations of Islam, which clearly distinguishes its adherents from the rest of Singaporeans. For example, it's forbidden to wear hijabs in schools and also the workplace in many fields.
I see this guy. This guy definitely has an agenda. This guy talking. Let me do something and check out. I see his agenda. I see where he's coming from. But when you talk about Singapore, what he's decided to focus on is really interesting. That's why it's good to watch a little of everybody, right? We can get back to that one. What I want to do is I want to see this one here to see if it gives us a little better insight. Why Singapore is one of the world's richest countries. So we can get back to that one, but I can kind of see where that's going in terms of the commentary, right? So let's look and see.
In 1965, the newly created nation of Malaysia did something that nations almost never do. It voluntarily ejected a strategic and important part of its own land, the 360 square mile island known as Singapore. While
So Singapore used to be a part of Malaysia.
independence is usually a cause for celebration, the new leader of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, foresaw the coming economic calamity.
You see, the whole of my adult life, I had believed in Malaysian merger.
Singapore was already in a terrible position prior to independence. 2/3 of its million population lived in slums, with many addicted to opium. Its highly mixed population was increasingly breaking out into violence. It had no significant industry, and unemployment was already high. Its newfound independence now meant it was without access to natural resources, as the island has none. Its larger and more powerful neighbors were not only going to cut it off from trade, but were actively hostile to Singapore's existence. To make matters even worse, British military forces were withdrawing from the island, taking with them 20% of the remaining economy. Singapore appeared to be destined for underdevelopment, violence, and poverty. Yet today, Singapore is the fourth richest nation on Earth. Its citizens are among the most educated, healthy, and productive of any country. It has the best infrastructure in the world. It is a leader in high-tech manufacturing.
The best infrastructure in the world. So those of us who are interested in infrastructure development, it would do us well to go spend some time in Singapore and study. So that's why it's important to be able to travel, y'all. I would love for a group of us, families to go and stay in Singapore for 3-4 months and really do some research and see how things are there, like up close and personal, and really learn. That's what this whole thing is about. You know what I'm saying? It's like really finding out what has been successful and seeing what we can take back to our communities and our countries and our continent to implement some of these ideas. So they say it has the best infrastructure in the world and they have the best high-tech manufacturing. So let's continue.
Violence, and poverty. Yet today, Singapore is the fourth richest nation on Earth. Its citizens are among the most educated, healthy, and productive of any country. It has the best infrastructure in the world. It is a leader in high-tech manufacturing and is the financial and logistical hub of all of Southeast Asia. But how did this unlikely, poor, and tiny Asian island nation go on to become one of the best places to live in the world? How did Singapore become so incredibly rich? This video is brought to you by Star Trek Fleet Command, a free-to-play mobile game available for iOS and Android. Interact with the various iconic characters from Star Trek lore. This exciting new story arc is launching alongside the debut of the brand new Paramount video.
Here. All right, here we go.
In the 19th century, there was a corporation so powerful it brought in more revenue than its host nation, had its own military, and a fifth of the entire world's population lived on its private lands. That corporation was the British East India Company. It derived its profits from shipping and trading resources from all over the world, and its most lucrative cargo was Chinese tea. To purchase the tea, it would sell massive quantities of opium that it grew in northern India.
Y'all remember
all of this
about the
shipping
Opium
happened
Wars?
to pass through one narrow corridor known as the Malacca Strait.
See what I told you earlier in our lives? We went over the Opium Wars. It was actually about tea. They just kind of talked about it there, but didn't give you the context. But you see the tea and opium. All right, let's get into it.
World's population lived on its private lands. That corporation was the British East India Company. It derived its profits from shipping and trading resources from all over the world, and its most lucrative cargo was Chinese tea. To purchase the tea, it would sell massive quantities of opium that it grew in northern India. All of this shipping happened to pass through one narrow corridor known as the Malacca Strait. Quickly, this became the company's most profitable trade route, constituting 50% of its revenue. But in order to protect this route and to make the voyage more feasible, the company desperately wanted their own port in the region. However, a naval superpower already had an iron grip in the region. For the 2 centuries prior, the Dutch had a monopoly on these lands and outpowered anyone who attempted to compete. As such, it was official company policy to not take any actions that might anger the Dutch, out of fear of disrupting the incredibly lucrative existing trade routes. But one tenacious company official named Sir Thomas Raffles took it upon himself to create such a port on the sparsely populated island that would go on to become Singapore. Situated at the tip of the Malayan Peninsula, it was the ultimate location to set up shop. After some back and forth in Europe, the Dutch eventually did nothing to stop the British from having the territory. But Singapore was not to become an ordinary port. In order to attract traders away from the existing ports in the region, Singapore was to become a free port, meaning there were zero taxes on businesses or port-related activities. This was a massive advantage over the other heavily taxed ports in the region, and word quickly spread. In just 4 years, Singapore had attracted tens of thousands of traders from China, Malaya, and India. Soon, the horizon became full of ships, as everyone clamored to seek their tax-free riches. But because of its lack of significant administrative oversight, Singapore became a hub for less desirable ventures. Slave trading, gambling, opium dens, violence, and prostitution became commonplace. But booming international trade continued to propel Singapore's importance and popularity. This was supercharged by the opening of the Suez Canal in Egypt. Trading from England to China was now 5,000 less miles, which in turn cut costs and dramatically increased shipping demands. The new route also now favored the Strait of Malacca instead of the Sunda Strait, meaning more traffic was passing by and utilizing the port. Singapore was now by far the most important port in the region, and as such, in 1967, it became an official crown colony of the British Empire. But yet another development would propel its importance further. The introduction of rubber trees in Malaya and booming global demand for tin, which was abundant in the region, meant Singapore was no longer just a stop on the way to China, but the hub for the riches of Southeast Asia. Resources would be extracted from the peninsula and then transported to Singapore, where it would be processed and shipped globally. As Singapore has no natural resources, this fostered a symbiotic economic relationship with Malaya. With its growing importance came greater British military presence, creating industry surrounding its dockyards and providing services to military personnel. By the year 1900, tiny Singapore would be home to more than 200,000 people, who were much better off than those in other nations in the region. But Singapore's centuries of unhindered growth would come to a screeching halt. As the 20th century progressed, Singapore, even being 6,000 miles away from Europe, was not safe from the ensuing global conflicts. During the Second World War, the Japanese Empire was engulfing all lands it came into contact with. In December 1941, the Japanese invasion of Malaya had commenced, and within 2 months, it was at Singapore's doorstep. Despite orders from London, Singapore was officially surrendered on February 15, 1942, and for 3 years, Singapore would undergo unbelievable suffering and destruction. Even as the tides of war changed and liberation came in 1945, the retaking of the island leveled much of the remaining structures. Singapore was no longer a jewel of Southeast Asia, but a smoldering pile of rubble. Devastated from war and neglected from a crippled British Empire, the rebuilding of Singapore was uncoordinated and unregulated. Haphazard slums started to dominate the island. Infrastructure was not fully restored, and violence and opium continued to wreck the population. As one travel magazine put it, filled with utter filth and poverty. One must see it with his own eyes to believe it. Over the centuries, the British did little to promote or integrate the diverse and densely packed population. There was no Singaporean identity, as each group lived amongst themselves, fought for their own resources, stayed isolated to their own customs,
a fractured
and oftentimes
society.
had conflicting interests with the other groups. Now, with terrible living conditions and growing unemployment, these groups started violence, further worsening Singapore's situation. For most of Singapore's existence, its desire to split from the British Empire was low, as its lack of resources meant it did not experience the exploitation that other colonies faced. When the British Empire was not able or willing to defend it during the war, with its now crippled economy, rising social violence, and with the decolonization of much of the rest of the world, the idea of independence started to propagate among the population. Singaporeans would go on to put their trust in one man to do just that. Lee Kuan Yew, a lawyer who spent his years studying in Britain, formed the People's Action Party, or PAP, and was able to successfully gain a few seats in local elections in 1955. Lee spearheaded the independence movement, prompting London to initially clamp down on the PAP. But with changing British public opinion in favor of decolonization, the process of independence had begun. In 1959, Lee was elected as Prime Minister on the promise of merging with Malaya, as in his mind, it was the only way for Singapore to survive. Its economy was symbiotically linked with Malaya. It had no capacity to defend itself, and it needed help in controlling the violence in righting its economy. Therefore, merging with Malaya made sense. On September 16, 1963, this became a reality when the former colonies of Malaya, North Borneo, Sarawak, and Singapore merged to become the Federation of Malaysia. But there's a problem. The Malaysian elections resulted in a party coming to power that ruled on the promise of putting ethnic Malays first. This was a problem for Singapore, which at the time was 60% Chinese and deeply mixed ethnically. Massive violence broke out in the streets, and the PAP, against their promise, ran in the federal elections on the promise of a fair and multi-ethnic state. The ruling party saw Singapore as a threat to political, social, and economic stability. As such, a unanimous vote ejected Singapore from the nation, just 2 years after the merger. Against its wishes, Singapore was independent and alone to fend for itself.
So Singapore became independent.
Lee Kuan Yew found himself in an impossible situation. How do you build a nation
Singapore formed because it actually got kicked out of Malaysia. Very interesting. So they didn't even fight for their independence. They were literally kicked out of a unitary government with Malaysia. So that's very interesting. And I think many people didn't know that.
of a population that has no national identity, let alone make it a prosperous state? How do you create jobs when you have no natural resources? How do you pull 70% of your population out of abject poverty, house and educate them, and set them on a course for a greater life?
Those are the questions, and those are the only questions that matter. I'm going to go over those questions again. These are the questions that you're asking yourself everywhere you go where you see African people. These are the questions that matter. How do you build a nation out of a population that really has no real identity of who they really are? And this is worldwide because of colonial education. Most Africans don't know African history. Most Africans on the continent are taught the history of their former colonizer more than they are taught their own history of their people, their country, their ethnic group, all of that. So you'll find an African educated person will know a lot about Winston Churchill, who won't know much about the founding fathers of their own country. And this is real talk.
Out of a population that has no national identity, let alone make it a prosperous state. How do you create jobs when you have no natural resources? How do you pull
create jobs when
70% of
you
your
have no
population out
natural
of abject
resources?
poverty, house and educate them, and set them on a course for a greater life?
70%
Independence
of
also brought
population.
the departure of the British military, further damaging the economy and taking away even more jobs. The cards were stacked against Singapore, which now found itself south of a Malaysia that planned to starve it economically by stealing trade, and north of an expansionist Indonesia who possibly had aspirations of invading. Lee Kuan Yew knew the fate of his fragile nation was up to him, and he decided he was going to drag Singapore into modernity, even if that meant with an iron fist.
Okay.
The first thing to overcome was the social unrest, while at the same time working to cement the PAP's political power. Individual freedoms were curtailed, free speech was banned, political opponents were jailed without trial, and draconian punishments were carried out for rioting, violence, and drug use.
So he went hardcore right away. He's like, there's no Bill of Rights here. We're going to actually clamp down because we have a mission. People can debate it and people can say, okay, that was, that's a police state and what have you. But I do think that if you're going to transform a society, it's going to be very uncomfortable for people who are used to fuckery, right? People who are used to fuckery think that fuckery is normal, and they will react very violent when you are anti-fuckery. So sometimes for periods of time, you would have to be draconian. And this is just the reality. It's not like nation building is not for the faint of heart. You're going to have to do some things. Sometimes you'll be wrong in some of the things that you do, but you're basically trying to create law and order as you're creating an uncomfortable environment for the thieves, for the corrupt people, for the people who like to litter, the people who like to, destroy the environment, make a country an ugly place. They're used to it. And so what you have to do is you have to create a new person. And the way that you create new people is something that cannot be done without making the older people or the people who are used to that way of life uncomfortable.
Line authoritarian approach even included public canings for chewing gum, graffiti, and public drunkenness.
Right? So you got publicly caned if you did any graffiti, which would basically take down the property values and make the place not look uniform and the place look like it's ungovernable. Chewing gum, if you're chewing gum in public, one of the biggest things in cleaning up a place is sticky chewing gum. So they were completely against it. In public drunkenness, it makes your country not look serious if you've got men walking around drunk. So you would get publicly caned, and till this day, you still get publicly caned. You'll be embarrassment for your family, but you will be caned publicly for these types of activities.
Violence and drug use. This hardline authoritarian approach even included public canings for chewing gum, graffiti, and public drunkenness. Anyone that spoke out against the government was sued into bankruptcy. Religious extremists, communist Chinese, Malays who wanted to reunite with Malaysia were all silenced or worse. Lee Kuan Yew's solution to the potentially explosive underlying ethnic and social tensions was authoritarian rule. However, as horrible as this was, it worked in curtailing violence and stabilizing the nation. In his mind, the population would not care about the diminishment of their freedoms if it meant he could provide them with economic prosperity and social peace. Free elections would continue in theory, however, they would be tampered with so much that the nation would become a one-party state under the PAP, whose rule still stands to this day. With the social and political situation stabilized, Lee would carry out a dramatic economic overhaul that would go on to enable a miracle. The most pressing.
So he stayed in power more than 4 years. What you're going to find is that whenever you have somebody who has a vision, who is capable, they need more than this mandated 4 years that the United States came up with to be able to see the vision go through, right? Probably the pyramids would not have been built the way that they were able to be built if you had a change of pharaohs every 4 years, right? You had to have continuity. And the thing about development, It's a double-edged sword, because if you have a very bad person staying in power for 20 years, which you've seen with people like Mobutu Sese Seko of the Congo, Zaire, formerly known as Zaire, it can set your country back 100 years if you have a bad leader for 20 years. But if you have a good leader for 20 years, it can advance your country, 50 years into the future. And this is just what happened. And so this is really about leadership. And it's not about sticking to what you think is normal in United States or in European countries. Every country has a different situation, and you're going to need some type of stability to have a monumental change the way that it happened in Singapore. So these are all things to consider.
Economic problem to address was housing. Representing one of the largest slum populations on Earth, 70% of all Singaporeans.
Let's go back on that.
The most pressing economic problem to address was housing. Representing one of the largest slum populations on Earth, 70% of all Singaporeans lived in rough temporary structures with no plumbing. Lee instituted a
can you all believe that? Just about 50 years ago, 70% of all Singaporeans lived in slums, temporary housing, makeshift housing like cardboard with zinc corrugated roofs. 70% of the population, and it's completely changed around in 50 years. It's absolutely incredible.
On Earth, 70% of all Singaporeans lived in rough temporary structures with no plumbing. Lee instituted a controversial law allowing the government to buy land cheaply, to which row after row of affordable housing would be constructed. While initially inspired by the British welfare state, Lee did not want his people dependent on the state forever. As a way to give citizens a stake in the nation's prosperity, to increase upkeep of structures, and to build wealth, residents were heavily encouraged to buy their apartments at low rates. The way in which they could afford this was through another policy that forced a percentage of one's income to be saved, called the Central Provident Fund. Originally, the savings fund was for pensions. However, Lee modified it, allowing citizens to spend it on housing. Slowly, over time, the amount forced to be saved was increased to 25% of every paycheck, with another 25% being deposited by employers. This eventually made Singapore the nation with the highest ratio of savings to income earned.
So it was a forced saving. So he forced everybody in the country to save 25% of their money. They just took it out, but it wasn't used for taxes for the government. It was used so that that cumulative money would be able to get people housing and ownership of housing, because the biggest expense that people spend is on housing. And so if you can get people to forcefully save their money, and then that money is then redistributed towards them buying a house over time, you actually have increased people's wealth, because now they own a house and they don't have rent that they have to pay or even mortgages that they have to pay, because you force them into savings. So that was actually kind of brilliant, right? So that 25% taken out of people's checks was not going to the government. It was going to this housing scheme that he put together so people could actually own their own houses. And that solves the problem of 70% of your population living in temporary slums and temporary housing without any sewage. That's crazy. 70%, that's a rough number.
Being deposited by employers. This eventually made Singapore the nation with the highest ratio of savings to income earned. This savings policy, coupled with cheap rates for state-owned housing, proved to be a massive success. All citizens living in slums were housed, and most started to be able to own their own property. Today, 80% of all Singaporeans live in houses they own that were originally built by the state. This has allowed
Do you understand that? Look at that turnaround. 70% of your people are living in cardboard boxes, but because of the leadership in changing certain policies where people are forced to save 25% of their income, whatever the income was, and the money didn't go to the government. It went to a fund so that people would be able to buy their own houses. And now 80% of the people own their own homes in Singapore. This is real. This is how you solve your housing issue. Yep, that's what Paul Kagame is doing. They all sat at the feet of Lee Kuan Yew in terms of trying to understand how you do this thing. And if you're serious, that's what you're going to do. Go to the person who was successful and ask them how they did it. How about that?
Singaporeans to largely avoid the extreme housing prices in other similar nations like Hong Kong. but building houses they
Rewind.
own that were originally built with economic
just
prosperity and social
rewind that.
peace. Free elections would continue in theory. However, they would be tampered with so much that the nation would become a one. And to
Sorry.
build wealth, residents were heavily encouraged to buy their apartments at low rates. The way in which they could afford this was through another policy that forced a percentage of one's income to be saved, called the Central Provident Fund.
Central
Originally, the
Provident
savings
Fund.
fund was for pensions. However, Lee modified it, allowing citizens to spend it on housing. Slowly, over time, the amount forced to be saved was increased to 25% of every paycheck, with another 25% being deposited by employers. This eventually made Singapore the nation with the highest ratio of savings to income earned. This savings policy, coupled with cheap rates for state-owned housing, proved to be a massive success. All citizens living in slums were housed, and most started to be able to own their own property. Today, 80% of all Singaporeans live in houses they own that were originally built by the state. This has allowed Singaporeans to largely avoid the extreme housing prices in
Exactly.
other similar nations like Hong Kong. But building houses for the population would not nearly be enough if the economy did not have jobs for them to work at. With no resources, no real existing manufacturing, and neighbors reluctant to trade, Lee knew the only way to grow was by doing everything possible to attract foreign investment. Keeping in line with Singapore's historical roots, taxes and regulations were kept low. Companies were even given massive incentives like being completely exempt from taxes for 10 years. To keep wages competitive, Lee banned unions and
What country isn't gonna? What company is not going to move to your country if they can be exempt from taxes for 10 years? Can you imagine? You know what I'm saying? Herbal results in 25th Dynasty. I'm gonna have to start looking at Singaporean laws to see if I need to locate my companies there. If I can get a 10-year amnesty of paying taxes, that might be something. But you know, I like to have my businesses in Africa because of the Africa project. But these are things to consider and think about in terms of strategically locating yourself. It's an international world now, y'all. Do not be stuck to just one country. Find out the country's policies and find yourself there if it works for you. You understand what I'm saying? It's about thriving and finding the places where you can thrive and get the most advantage from, man. Forget these borders. These borders don't mean nothing.
actively encourage businesses to fire all workers when faced with the strike. The government also started dumping money into infrastructure projects and creating sprawling modern industrial zones. Seeing as Singapore's domestic market was small, numerous policies were implemented to gear the economy toward exports. Mixed with Singapore's existing port.
So they did everything to gear the economy towards exports. Someone asked, how is a currency made strong? A currency is made strong if you have goods from your country that people want, because what happens is that people now have to start exchanging with your currency and your goods and putting their currency into your country, which is going to be bought and sold for your goods. And that's how you create a strength of a currency. And he understood that you have to have an export market because it's about velocity of money. The more money is attracted to your goods and the more money is attracted to your country, just look at it as like tourism, right? If your country is attractive for people to visit, then people are going to visit and they're going to spend money in your country, which makes your country in demand. And then therefore your country has growth. So anytime there's a demand for a product, that product maker grows economically. And so if there's a demand for things in your country, to be in your country, to visit your country, to buy your country's goods, you're able to have greater demand, which creates your economics, and then also creates a thing called velocity of money, which is the telltale sign of a robust economy. All right. So he knew that he had to focus on exports, and the only way you can focus on exports and not imports. That's what most of the countries that are poor focus on, imports. Remember I told you last time that most of these underdeveloped countries in the Caribbean and Africa, the government's only way of making money is through import duties. Well, you're never going to be a wealthy country that has to import most of what it needs. You become wealthy if you're exporting. That's how you become wealthy. And he saw that early, so he focused on exporting. All right, so let me come back.
Zones. Seeing as Singapore's domestic market was small, numerous policies were implemented to gear the economy toward exports. Mixed with Singapore's existing port, incredible geography, and business-friendly policies, simple, labor-intensive foreign businesses started pouring in. This was helped further by Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution in China that scared investors away from Hong Kong and Taiwan. Within just 10 years, Singapore had practically zero unemployment. and the economy was growing at a monstrous 13% every year.
In 10 years of staying with this, zero unemployment. You say, what was he exporting? He was doing high skilled manufacturing. They're probably going to talk about it. It just shows all the machinery they had. They were just making electronics. They were making all types of goods to be sold. So they focused on manufacturing. And in 10 years, zero unemployment. Imagine if we could say that about any African countries. Zero unemployment. That means that whenever your students finish university, there's a job waiting for them. That's what zero unemployment looks like. Okay.
Here, Singapore would continue to implement hyper-capitalistic policies to increase investment by foreign companies, so much so that it is the second easiest nation to do business in. With an economy starting to become ever more reliant on government intervention, Lee also took drastic measures to cut out corruption. This included sentencing those suspected to death, as well as offering some of the highest wages in the world for government officials, helping to reduce the desire to engage in corruption in the first.
Okay, that's key. So one of the problems that we see in Africa is that government officials, particularly the policemen and what have you, they're paid very poorly. So it makes them want to be corrupt just to survive, right? So that's why you'll see checkpoints, and basically the police officers turn roads into their personal toll booths because they're not getting paid enough. And so they're standing out in the hot sun, risking their lives, trying to, stop violence and crime, but they're getting paid not even enough to feed themselves and their family. So that's what gives rise to corruption. So what he saw was, okay, I'm going to disincentivize people to be corrupt. I'm going to pay them more money, but if you do get caught with corruption, you get the death penalty. And that's how serious they took it there. All right.
Sentencing those suspected to death, as well as offering some of the highest wages in the world for government officials, helping to reduce the desire to engage in corruption in the first place. This worked. And today, Singapore is one of the least corrupt nations on earth. This substantially increased the effectiveness of policy implementation, as well as increasing investor confidence, further boosting growth and cutting down on wasteful spending. But Lee did not want Singapore to always be focused on simple, cheap manufacturing. He knew the most valuable resource the nation had was its human capital. As such, he started creating technical schools, paid foreign companies to train workers, and created...
Let me read that. Let me rewind that. He said something very key in here.
...creating technical schools, paid foreign companies to train workers, and created modern hospitals to keep the population healthy.
All right, hold on. I want you all... I'm going to go back.
But Lee did not want Singapore to always be focused on simple, cheap manufacturing. He knew the most valuable resource the nation had was its human capital.
There we go. Those of you who tuned in on the conversation on capitalism and how capitalism is ill-defined because they're only using two definitions of capital, which is goods and money, that there are two other definitions that of things that would classify as capital. I say human capital and environmental capital. Well, he talks about it here. Lee Kuan Yew invested in human capital because, remember, said that the true definition of capitalism is the productive use and reinvestment of capital, right? So then it depends on how you then define capital. The northern cradle of civilization defines capital as two things, goods and money, whereas the southern cradle of civilization has goods, money, environmental capital, and human capital. That's why you invest in your children. Your children are not an extra mouth to feed that's a curse. There's actually an extra hand to help in, the farm. So it just depends on how you look at it, and it depends on your environment. So in here, he was very clear that the biggest resource that they actually have in Singapore is actually human capital. So he invested in human capital. And we see this also in Rwanda in the citizenry. They have a plan to graduate 10,000 engineers by a certain date, a few years from now. They also have free healthcare in Rwanda. It's like $1 a year, which is essentially free because they're investing in the population. They have exercise day two times a month. We can look at videos when I cover, do a special live on Rwanda. to encourage people to exercise, because the government says that if we're going to give you basically free healthcare, you meet us halfway by being healthy. So they have what you call car-free Saturday or car-free Sunday. I forget which day it is, but it's twice a month. And this is an investment in human capital. So you invest in education, like for instance, in Rwanda, computer science is taught as a second language, like you have English as a second language, to prepare the people to be competitive in a competitive world. That's the investment in human capital. So I'm just so happy that they said that. And then I think the people who've tuned in to these talks that we've been having, it's starting to come together now. You're starting to see how these things piece together.
Bending. But Lee did not want Singapore to always be focused on simple, cheap manufacturing. He knew the most valuable resource the nation had was its human capital. As such, he started creating technical schools, paid foreign companies to train workers, and created modern hospitals to keep the population healthy. This in turn brought in more specialized industry and thus higher wages, higher savings, and more budget for the government to reinvest in education. This created a positive feedback loop of productivity gains. By the 1980s, Singapore was now in the business of petrochemicals, pharmaceuticals, advanced computer components, shipbuilding, chemical manufacturing, and more. In fact, despite Singapore's lack of resources, it had become the world's third largest producer of refined petroleum. This is because it had once again become the regional hub of Southeast Asia, importing raw materials from its neighbors, processing and manufacturing them, and then shipping them across the planet. This status of regional hub was further facilitated by—
And this is exactly what all African countries will have to do. The only difference is we actually have the raw materials under our feet. So once you start turning your country into a manufacturing hub, you start getting the wealth of Singapore. There are formulas to this, y'all. It's science. It's just understanding who's done it, what worked, what didn't, and what you can implement. And he was clear on manufacturing. A place with no resources has the third leading refining of crude oil to petroleum. But a place like Nigeria, where you get the best crude oil, it's not the leading refineries. Dangote has just put up a refinery, but Singapore had been doing this for the last 50 years, y'all. So we're literally 50 years behind. And it shows based on our GDP, our economic status, what's happening economically in our countries. We're behind. Singapore has been ahead. And the thing is that Singapore gave everyone their playbook. This is how we did what we did. They didn't hide it, you know? So, all right, let's go further.
This is because it had once again become the regional hub of Southeast Asia, importing raw materials from its neighbors, processing and manufacturing them, and then shipping them across the planet.
Okay, so guess what? You get the most money for finished goods, right? So they're on the last leg of the commerce chain, which is selling refined processed goods. Well, Africa is on the first leg of selling raw material. So who's going to be rich and who's going to be poor? The person selling raw material or the person selling the finished raw material or the finished product from raw materials? It's always going to be the finished product makes more money. Value-added products makes more money. Other words, fruit juice, fruit drinks, fruit jam, fruit whatever will make more money than the fruit itself. So chocolate is going to make more money than cocoa. If you're not refining and processing your raw materials, you will always lose in the game called economics. And that's where Africa is at. And Singapore showed you that you can make the most money by not even having any raw materials. Get those raw materials imported into your country and then turn them into finished products and sell them in the world market. Back to even the people who sold you the raw materials. How about that? Okay? This is how people build wealth, y'all.
Raw materials from its neighbors, processing and manufacturing them, and then shipping them across the planet. This status of regional hub was further facilitated by Singapore's rapidly growing financial sector, which strategically bridged the gap between American markets closing and European markets opening. This rise was also perfectly timed, as many Asian nations were undergoing tremendous growth, allowing Singapore to act as the logistical and financial hub through which foreign investment was distributed.
So what he did was, listen to that. He noticed that the time zone for Asia was different than between the United States and Europe. So the times when the US and the European markets are closed, you can have these Asian markets open and let Singapore be the hub for Asian financial activity. And what happens is that now you have a 24-hour economic cycle for finances because Singapore has filled the gap for Asia in the Asian time frame. Those of us who trade Forex know about the Asian box, and we know about the Asian time, we know about London time, and we know about the US markets opening. So he saw that very clearly and made Singapore the hub for Asian financial activity that does not overlap with Europe and America. So when American markets are asleep, the Asian markets are awake, and it's led by Singapore. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Okay.
Timed, as many Asian nations were undergoing tremendous growth, allowing Singapore to act as a logistical and financial hub through which foreign investment was distributed. This, mixed with pro-financial policies, allowed Singapore to become the fourth largest financial center in the world. But Singapore, coming from such humble beginnings, meant it did not have its own class of entrepreneurs. The lack of capital and technical know-how meant it was impossible for Singaporeans to build substantial companies of their own to compete on the world stage. Not wanting to be left out and to further facilitate growth, Lee organized a group of gifted civil servants and international businessmen to make efficient state-owned enterprises. This included Singapore Airlines, steel, iron, and chemical manufacturing, and many other capital-intensive.
Okay. You cannot build an economy that is serious without
This included Singapore Airlines,
manufacturing steel and iron. You can't. So this guy's serious, and then they built their own airline. And he was very clear that he's inviting people from other countries to do business, but then he doesn't want to have the Singaporean people left out. So he started state-owned companies run by entrepreneurs. And then, of course, they hired and trained Singaporean citizens at the state-run businesses because it's owned by the state, so they can set the policies of who they hire, who they train, and all of that. So he looked out for his own population by having these state-run businesses. And there are key businesses too: iron, manufacturing, steel manufacturing. You got to have a steel plant in your country if you're really serious about building your country.
Companies of their own to compete on the world stage. Not wanting to be left out and to further facilitate growth, Lee organized a group of gifted civil servants and international businessmen to make efficient state-owned enterprises. This included Singapore Airlines, steel, iron, and chemical manufacturing, and many other capital-intensive enterprises. While state-owned companies are usually synonymous with inefficiency, in Singapore, their primary objective from the very beginning was to make a profit. Low corruption in government, Lee's willingness to shut down loss-making ventures, and the lack of unions, which kept costs low, meant these companies were wildly successful. By the 90s, the government began limited privatization of the most profitable, giving Singaporeans preferential rates for buying shares. These companies helped to diversify the economy as well as filling gaps in the market. The revenue.
So if you're a Singaporean citizen, you could actually have a preferential rate of buying shares in these businesses, which then increases the wealth of your population. This is the playbook. You know, you have state-run businesses and they're doing well. Well, you let your citizens buy shares in those businesses, and then they make money while you make money. Very good.
Revenue generated was also placed in a sovereign wealth fund, which was then used to further funding for healthcare, infrastructure, and education.
So the profits used from these businesses that were state-run went into the sovereign wealth fund of the country, which then goes into further reinvestment to healthcare, infrastructure, and education. All of this can be done as long as you have a grip on corruption, because what will usually happen is you'll have your greedy minister of this, minister of that, parliamentary member of this or that. They'll basically just steal from these funds and put that money into Swiss bank accounts. But he stopped all of that from happening. He had everyone investigated all the time. And if you were caught for being corrupt, you'd get the death penalty. It was that simple.
Today, Singapore is one of the richest, most advanced, and competitive economies in the world. It operates the second largest port, is the second easiest nation to do business in, and still attracts the third highest foreign direct investment. Its people have affordable housing. They have access to world-class healthcare, and their students test the highest in the world. Its government under Lee Kuan Yew was able to efficiently implement policies that relied not on ideology, but on their utility to Singapore's long-term prosperity.
They implemented measures not on their ideology, but on their utility. See, a lot of us get ideologically put into a box where we're not using practical sense. Utility always has to rule over ideology, because at the end of the day, baby needs food. And if you don't have that food ready for the baby starves, and the baby can't eat off of ideology. So he's very clear that it is about utility and it's about results. And he created it.
But this has, of course, come at the cost of political and certain individual freedoms. While it's hard to agree with its authoritarian governance, it's hard to argue with its success. The consolidated power allowed Singapore to maximize its.
So in America, they make you feel like you're participating in the process, but everything is controlled by lobbyists and, business people who fund American politicians. And so, it's not even really clear that your votes are actually counted. So it's a democracy on paper, but not really. And we all know that. So, this whole thing about authoritarian rule, it's pretty much authoritarian in America. We saw it during the pandemic when people were not allowed to speak freely. People were definitely throttled. Their social media was taken down if they said anything against the state or what the state was doing during the pandemic. So we saw that. So it's not like America is this place where everything is hunky-dory and fully democratic. What they want to do is they want to criticize somebody who's not using the American political structure, but is creating results. And so I'd rather live in a place with results and no crime, and allows me to do business, and I can raise my children to be intelligent in a culture that's modest, than to be in a place that's wild like America and say America's cool because it has elections every 4 years where they have you choose between a rotten orange and a rotten apple until you have your free choice of fruit. That's what the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, at least to me, is. It's just a rotten apple or a rotten orange, but then they tell you have your free choice of fruit. Whatever you choose, you're going to get a rotten piece of fruit. So I ain't into all of that. I'm into results, y'all. So Singapore is a place that I want to visit. I want to live there for a couple months just to really see what it's like, and then whatever I can learn, take it over to Africa.
Advantages while limiting its shortcomings. Singapore has always been lucky with its location on one of, if not the most important global shipping lane. It got lucky with riding the growth of globalization in the second half of the 20th century. But most importantly, it got lucky that its dictator, Lee Kuan Yew, was smart and more or less benevolent in his actions. While it might be easy for those of us that live in Western countries to criticize some of Singapore's actions, our ideals and institutions have had hundreds of years to form, while developing nations are expected to do the same in less than a generation. The path Singapore took should not be and likely can't be replicated by other nations. Singapore's economy is not perfect for the world. It's perfect for Singapore.
Listen to that little caveat. It almost sounds like he doesn't want other countries to rise, right? So they all have their angles in their narration, but that one was decent until the end. It's clear that they don't want too many more Singapores to compete with their colonial countries. But we got the game. You know what I'm saying? Big up Tenicio. Tenicio's in the house. Good brother Tenicio. I think he'll be having a live show soon talking about agriculture. If you want to call in, Tenicio, feel free to call in, introduce yourself to the audience, and let them know what your show will be about and when you'll be broadcasting. He's a master of agriculture based in Atlanta area and has a lot of information on being able to start your own gardens, your own orchards, and some of the money that you can get through grants and different programs that exist for people who are farming. So I look forward to Tenicio's show as well. And Lowell says, yup. And Kashaku says, it's interesting. All the issues Maget Wade complained about, Lee Kuan Yew solved it. Yup. Exactly. And that's why I've done the shows the way I've done the shows, y'all. I'm kind of giving you building blocks to understand what needs to be done and why, right? But if you don't understand some of these things, you might watch these things and just have a knee-jerk reaction and be like, no, these people said capitalism and they said this, and so I'm against it. I don't want to listen and I don't want to learn. But the whole point is not to agree with people, but to see who's been successful and why. And then you can measure it against, your own ideologies and to see where your ideologies have taken you. Because we've got a lot of ideologies, but are they producing results for us? So that's why I wanted to show you all about Singapore. I think one of the things that might be interesting is one of the great things about Singapore is what they've done with architecture. So I wanted to show you all what some of the great buildings of Singapore looks like. So let's just see what we can see. And this is what you can do when you have a wealthy country. Your skyline can look different with the quickness. You understand what I'm saying? But he was manufacturing, y'all. All right. Let's look at this and see what they got. It's a few minutes long.
Hi, Singapore is filled of amazing buildings from award-winning architects and designers, and new buildings seem to get erected here at an incredible rate. Here are 10 fascinating buildings from Singapore's independence to the present day from this incredible city. Pearl Bank Apartments was once Singapore's tallest residential building. The horseshoe-shaped layout was designed to help give shade from the fierce Singaporean sun. Sadly, this venerable building is likely to be demolished and redeveloped in the next couple of years. Completed in 1973, Golden Mile Complex is one of the early pioneers of mixed-use development. It evokes similar designs from Europe, notably London's Brunswick Centre. Unlike that building, Golden Mile has been allowed to fall into a shabby state of repair, but with some proper renovation, this venerable building could recapture some of its original glory. Another 1970s brutalist design, People's Park Complex is home to shops, offices, and residential units. Its 25-story profile dominates the surrounding low-rise Chinatown. Once the largest shopping complex in Singapore, it also featured the country's first atrium. Like the other 1970s brutalist buildings featured here, the future of this one is in the balance. Fourth on the list is Reflections at Keppel Bay, completed in 2011. This residential complex has over 1,000 units. Designed by Daniel Libeskind, who also designed the master plan for the World Trade Center Memorial in New York. Overlooking Keppel Marina, the 6 sinuous towers reflect the fluidity of sails and water of the nearby harbor. Fifth on the list of amazing buildings, the Interlace is a 1,000-unit apartment building noteworthy for its design. 31 blocks stacked upon each other and resembling a giant Jenga game. Despite its size, this clever horizontal design is sympathetic to its surroundings and helped it to win World Building of the Year in 2015. The NTU campus has several eye-catching buildings. A swirling green roof tops off the 5-story building that's home to the School of Art, Design and Media. The high-performance building envelope reduces energy consumption and enhances natural views. Another building, The Hive, has done away with traditional classroom layouts with its 56 curved classrooms equipped with the latest technologies.
Those were classrooms, y'all. That's crazy. Let me rewind that. That's classrooms.
The high-performance building envelope reduces energy consumption and enhances natural views. Another building, The Hive, has done away with traditional classroom layouts with its 56 curved classrooms equipped with the latest technologies. Esplanade is Singapore's premier arts venue and features a theatre and concert hall. The unique architectural design is known to locals as the Big Durians, as the 7,000 triangular aluminium sunshades resemble 2 halves of the fruit. Each of the iconic spikes is cleaned by hand, and it takes 2 months to complete every year.
Cleaned by hand.
Sky Habitat was designed by Moshe Savdi Architects, the same team behind Marina Bay Sands. These 2 residential towers in Singapore's Bishan neighborhood contain over 500 apartments, each with its own balcony. 3 broad bridges span the void between the 2 buildings. Looked at from a distance, it resembles some space-age building teleported right into Singapore's heartlands. These amazing living super trees bring scale and drama to Gardens by the Bay. They're also part of the site's environmental system, generating hot water and electricity for the entire complex.
That's crazy.
These
That's
two
crazy.
conservatories are a showcase of sustainable building technologies, as well as being the world's largest column-free glass houses. They were awarded World Building of the Year in 2012.
He's going too quick.
Finally, the daddy of modern architecture in Singapore, Marina Bay Sands tops the list of amazing buildings. An integrated resort includes a 2,500-room hotel, convention center, shopping mall, a museum, and 2 large theaters. The complex is topped by a 340-meter-long sky park with bars, restaurants, and an infinity swimming pool. Now a world-famous building, it symbolizes Singapore's confidence as one of the most future-looking countries in the world.
Yeah, he went too quick through some of them, but you know, you can take your time, y'all, and you can actually look at more. But yeah, there's questions. Caribbean islands are so small. Yep, they could definitely take a page out of Singapore, you know. But I bet you a lot of these leaders, you talk to them about Lee Kuan Yew, they don't even know who he is. You talk about Singapore, they don't even know. They're not even looking to visit to learn. I wonder if Dubai studies Singapore. Yes. So I said earlier that the top 4 leaders that I think that the world has seen in the modern time in terms of developing their countries is one guy named Sheikh Zayed out of Dubai, or the United Arab Emirates. And when he died, the whole country went into authentic mourning because he really took that country from like A to Z, like from the lowest to the highest in terms of what he was able to do to develop the country. His name is Sheikh Zayed, and I might do a live about him maybe next week. But the 4 that I mentioned that should be studied when we talk about nation building: Sheikh Zayed out of the United Arab Emirates, Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore, Paul Kagame, Rwanda, and Nayib Bukele, El Salvador. Those are the 4 that need to be studied. You know, and I'm going to cover all of them. Today was Lee Kuan Yew, just for people to just see about Singapore. There's so much more to discuss in terms of even getting into their policies even more, but I don't want to overdo it today. But I just wanted people to be conversant and know what's going on with Singapore and to understand that it didn't happen by accident. Yeah, the airport is sick. Yep. And Tanisio says the buildings are gorgeous. Absolutely. So I wanted to show you all that, and you all to be clear that development has happened in different places in the world where you've seen serious leaders. And even if the leader gets taken down, well, another leader has to come and understand that it doesn't stop. 70% of the people of Singapore were basically homeless, living in shacks made out of cardboard and corrugated roof. And within 40 years, he turned that around to 80% of the people being homeowners in Singapore. And I believe when they talk about homeowners, it's like mortgage-free homeowners. Like their mortgages are already paid for because they're forced to save 25%, not for taxes, but for being able to buy your own house through a system where everyone puts their money together. This is what I'm talking about, y'all. And this is where the rubber meets the road. So the whole point of the matter is African leaders are going to have to get on point. Now, we see some are getting on point and some are taking it seriously, but they're far and few in between. And what's going on right now is because of the ease of travel, Africans in the diaspora are looking for places where they can go and thrive. Now, there's actually African diasporic communities in Singapore, and they talk about life in Singapore and how they love it, like being Black in Singapore. Like there's people who talk about it, you know what I mean? And they talk about how, you know, great the country is. And, you know, maybe we'll see, you know, we can talk about it and see some videos in terms of people who like living in Singapore. You know what I'm saying? But what I'm saying is this. All I'm saying is you're going to reach a point where people are looking for places where they can thrive. I'm always going to choose Africa because I'm African and I want to see the development of my continent. Nothing sweeter than that. But what's happening now is that our people diasporically are finding different places to live and starting their own communities, diasporic communities of Black folks from Europe, Black folks from the Caribbean, from United States, are all moving to these countries to look for better opportunities. You know what I'm saying? Let's look at a video that I want to share with you all about life in Singapore. You know, you may want to do a profile on Mondragon Corporation in Basque, Spain. Yeah, I'll look into it and we can talk about what you'd like me to cover. And Healing Beauty says incredible. Yep. So let's look at what some folks in Singapore got to say about Singapore, living in Singapore. So let's see what the brothers got to say here. But I think it's some place that we all should visit just to learn.
Disneyland for adults. It's so easy to live here. I can't say there's much there's tiny amount of racism here, but it's so small. It's ridiculous, you know, but I would say there's none.
Welcome to the Melanated Files. In this series, we highlight and share the stories of Black people from across the globe. Remember to subscribe to this channel for weekly videos and also follow us on social media for regular updates. Let's get into the interview.
I don't know why, but I can't seem to get you off my mind. And I know it's true, and I'll say this to you. I want you back. There's something inside, yeah, there's something inside that brings me back to you, yeah. No, I can't hide it, no, I can't hide it anymore. Something inside, something inside. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Used to be a swamp, y'all.
My name's Michael Francis, and I'm from London, England. I was brought up born in Dulwich, and I was brought up in South London near Clapham North. But basically, I've lived nearly everywhere in London, so I know London quite well. Why Singapore? Because we was offered a job here, and my wife asked me if we could come here, and I thought about it for about, a few minutes, and I says, this opportunity is never going to come again, so let's just do it. So the problem was I had to go and ask work if I could get time off, a career break. So they turned around and said to me, I had to give me about 3 months, 5 months or something like that, and then they eventually gave me the answer that I could go. So I spent, we was only supposed to come here for a year, but ended up staying 9.5 years. So I used to be a fireman in the London Fire Brigade. So yeah, I took a career break from that, yeah. But I only had like 4.5 years left. So yeah. Right now I do a lot of volunteering. I do photography for, for charities. And what I do is I go along mainly to their events, if they're raising money or they're praising, giving good things to their people that have been volunteering. That's what I do. I just take photographs for them and then pass them on to them, and then they publish them in their on their website or their magazine or periodicals that people read outside, like Tatler. Well, gosh. So I had this idea. I've been doing like a lot of barbecues and doing like Jamaican food, like jerk chicken or curry goat. And everyone kept saying to me, your food's so good, you should open a restaurant here. And I'm going, no, I can't do that. So eventually, one day, I came up to this place called the Dot Marketplace in the East Coast, and I chatted with the owner, and the owner said, I said to him, I've got this idea of opening one of your food stalls and doing a Jamaican, restaurant. He said to me, well, if you want to do that, just bring the food, cook some food and bring it up here. So I did a big spread, brought it up here, they ate the food. They said it's very, very different and it's delicious. We want you to open up. So it took about, 6 months to open up the place, but eventually I got it open. And I got really, really good reviews through Facebook and Instagram. And I had I forgot the name, Esquire magazine and radio stations come down to interview me. So the food was well received in Singapore. So I closed that down in 2017. Two reasons. It was one, my mother just died. So I had to go back to Jamaica. I got to go back to London and then Jamaica. And the other reason is I couldn't get any staff. Over here, they have you got to employ 5 Singaporeans to 1 foreigner. And not many Singaporeans want to do, food in the F&B business. So, it was very difficult. It was a one-man show.
So you see, how they protect their population. And if you're going to do a business, you got to have 5 Singaporeans to 1 outsider. That's very serious.
Too many things I like here. Sunshine. What else? The easy way of living. I call it Disneyland for adults. It's so easy to live here. What else do I love? I love the food. You can't pin me down on one thing that I like to eat here. All of it is good, so you should try it. Just come and try it. Gosh, I can't think of no do-it-yourself shops. No big do-it-yourself chains. So you can't just turn up somewhere and buy a tool or that's the only thing that I dislike about Singapore. I feel like it's been an adventure. I've met really, really good people here. You just got to be open and just soak up the lifestyle. Also, living here as well, you get to travel and see a lot of the other islands and countries around Singapore, like Vietnam, Cambodia, Australia, and so forth. Yeah, put it like this. Yeah, when I first came here, I spent a year eating just chicken rice, and trying it from every different place, all over, to find out which one was the best. Then the next year, I tried wonton noodle soup, and I tried that all over the island. Then the next year, the 3rd year, I tried laksa, and that is completely no matter where you go, it's completely different no matter where you go. So that's another delicious food as well. But also like masala dosa. I like so many things here. So how would I say? I've been fortunate that I have met many black people here, and we're still friends. Even up to last night, I was out with some of them last night for a birthday. So I've had a really good black network here that we're very, very close, and we meet up a lot. It's totally different. It's how do you put it again? It's much more relaxed here. I can't say there's much there's tiny amount of racism here. It's so small, it's ridiculous, but I would say there's none, to be honest with you. I think it's pretty easy here. It's very easy to live here. Yeah, very, very easy. You don't have to, that feeling when you're walking down the street in the UK or Jamaica or the Caribbean, and you have this little 6th sense or 7th sense going on in the back. You've got this radar looking out for trouble. When you're here, that's switched off. You don't have that at all. It's gone. The general attitude. You're talking from the locals, or you mean your locals? I think it depends. Some stay on their own. Most of them stay on their own. Like if they stay in the HDBs, they stay on their own. But I'd say we mix a lot with Malays and we mix a lot with the Indians, but not so much with the Chinese here. What I mean by that is that you don't see many of the Chinese locals out at the weekends, or if you're living next door, you don't normally see them. They're normally, I don't know, they're either inside doing something, or they're out, the children are studying, or that kind of thing. There is a guy here that I know, Donny, but he lives over in the west, and it's a bit far to go over there. So I go to a guy literally downstairs, Atta cuts, and I have to explain to him how to get my hair done. So I have to tell him how to comb the hair. I said, don't be so gentle, be tough. My hair's it's not going to hurt me. Just be rough with my hair, and I have to teach him how to use the clippers, and No, he's Malay. He's Malay, but he's black anyway. Black the same. The biggest difference, I think, is it's much more cosmopolitan, and there's the same amount of things going on over here. It's just that they don't advertise it. So you tend to stumble onto things in Singapore, whereas in the UK, you hear and people talk about it a lot more. Gosh, one thing in the world. What thing will I change? I'd like people to love each other more, because that's the way to go forward. There's too many.
Let's see what he says about the laws.
The biggest misconception is that there's the laws, and that you'll get fined for everything. So it's much more relaxed than you think. And One of the things I noticed when I first came here, they put on a show called Rocky Horror Show, and we were wondering whether to dress up for it, yeah? And then when we got there, there's half the audience was dressed up. And when we sat down to watch the Rocky Horror Show, they showed every single thing. They didn't cut one thing out. Wasn't censored at all. And that's when I realized that Singapore was changing. Yeah. So one of the things, with the chewing gum one, you can't buy chewing gum. That's why you can't buy it. So it's impossible. You might be able to bring it in, but you can't buy it. Yeah. Oh, the spitting one. I've not seen anyone being charged for spitting, but I have seen the police arrest people here. And it's amazing how they do it. Especially down in the center. It's usually plainclothes police, and they just grab the person and it's gone. They're gone, like quick. They're not, you wouldn't even know that it happened. It's so quick.
It's illegal to spit publicly.
So it is true that you will get the cane here. It is true for drugs. You will definitely get that. The death penalty is definitely here. But because of that, I think most people are peaceful here. So I've not seen, I think I've only ever seen one fight here since I've been here. I think with the movie, what's it called? Something Rich Asians, Crazy Rich Asians, yeah? I think that really showed what the rich Asians, or what it's like in Singapore. It's pretty accurate, yeah. I once went on a...
I'm not going to play anymore. You all kind of get the point. You can watch more if you want, but it's just different folks from the diaspora who live there. The point is not necessarily for, people to move or live there, but to understand that this place built itself up from literally nothing to what it is now, where it's a desired destination, where many of our people live there, and there is an expat community in Singapore. So there are folks who have traveled, and they have found Singapore as a place where they want to settle because it's so peaceful there, and ease of doing business and making money and what have you. And then the educational system is very advanced. So I think that it's something that people need to study a little bit more, take seriously. I've been hip to Singapore for some time. I've been fascinated with Lee Kuan Yew. And if anything, if you didn't learn anything today, you learned the name Lee Kuan Yew. You can do further studies on a person who basically put his people on his back and guided them out of a swamp into prosperity. And Lowell says we didn't learn this in history class because if we did, the citizens of this country would question the government more heavily. This country would be mad different. Correct. Tanisio says that's what America, white man was caned for back in the days, back in the 90s, spitting. Yeah. But you can't just go there and spit in public. That's like, that's like crazy to them there. Just like in Rwanda, if they people see you littering, they think you're crazy, and that's the type of ethos you want to develop amongst your citizenry, where they see, things that is bad for the country, that if you're seen as being insane. And that's where we need to get to, where in America, insanity has become commonplace, right? And you go many other places too. Leadership is engaged in insane activities that doesn't make any sense, like investing in, let's just say, things that don't yield anything. You might want to invest in a sports stadium, but you don't invest in your schools. You don't invest in your hospitals. You don't invest in your manufacturing sector. So everything becomes about recreation and sports. You know what I'm saying? So at some point, the adults have to show up. And when a boat is sinking, and it keeps sinking, you're going to need to hire some engineers who have above average IQ, because your boat keeps sinking. So at some point, the adults have to show up and start having adult conversations and adult implementation of solutions. And Lee Kuan Yew is one of the most effective people in modern day history to take a place that was a joke, that was not taken seriously. It was taken so unseriously, it got kicked out of Malaysia. They didn't even want it. Even though it's a port city, can you imagine a country giving up its port? That's how much they thought you were useless, that they didn't even think that your port was valuable enough to keep you in the union. So they got rid of you. You had to go independent. And then because of leadership, you turn it around where it becomes the most desired port city state in the world. So this is Singapore, y'all. And this can happen in other countries in the world. And it is happening right now in El Salvador. It's happening in Rwanda. Those who decided to sit at his feet and study Singapore are yielding results. I'll tell y'all right now, as far as El Salvador goes, I thought I was going to see a rundown place when I went to El Salvador. El Salvador is not run down, y'all. The infrastructure is nice in El Salvador. The roads are very nice. It's a very clean country. And there's construction projects going on. They got Bitcoin on and popping. El Salvador is a place that you might want to check out for those of us who are interested in seeing how countries develop. Rwanda is another place. I left Rwanda during the pandemic because they the thing about Rwanda, so the thing about a serious country is law and order may not be what you like sometimes. Like we want law and order, but in Rwanda, when they do law and order, they're not playing around. Like these countries take security seriously because they understand you can't develop a country if it's unstable, right? If criminals are taking over, if people who want to do coup d'etats or get a mouth to speak and oxygen to breathe, they're not letting that happen. So when they pass the quarantine laws and curfew laws in Rwanda, it was serious when I was there, to the point where this was like 2020. We decided to go and, spend a couple months in Rwanda because that's our, that's home. And when we went, like, you couldn't even go out at certain times of the day. I'm talking like curfews were like at 6 p.m. You had to be in the house. Like you couldn't even be out. And it's like, then there were certain days where everyone was supposed to be on lockdown and the only people could be out were people going to the grocery store. And you had to have a pass on your phone that you had to register yourself on the phone saying that you were going to groceries that day. And if the police pull you over, you say that you did the pass. This is what was going on in Rwanda, and they shut down the businesses. I came there to open up a retail, end of Herbal Results. And I wasn't able to because there was no business going on during that time. Because like when the government says something, people abide by it in Rwanda. And that's why the place runs so well. But, there's two sides of that, right? Like if you want some freedom and you want to free up, Rwanda is not the place you want to be when there's like an emergency situation, because they're going to adhere to it. And you're not going to be able to enjoy the fruits of being in a lackluster place that doesn't observe the laws, right? So for that, you might want to go somewhere else. But the other side is that like when everything else is running the way it's supposed to be running, you love to be in these countries because you know that your children are safe. You're not worried about no kidnapped kids. You're not worried about your wife being harassed. You're not worried about crime against your family. You're not worried about people, like doing home invasions and killing you. And so this is one of the reasons why you want to be in a country that takes law and order seriously, because during the peace times and when everything's normal, those are the best places to be. They can be the worst places to be when it's like a state of emergency, because when they lock down, y'all. Like it's very serious when they lock down. But when everything is normal, it's a place where you want to be because you literally can sleep with your doors unlocked. You know what I'm saying? Your car doesn't even have to be locked. In Rwanda, I barely even lock my car. Like that's real talk. Like in Rwanda, sometimes I don't even lock my car because I'm not worried about anyone stealing anything in Rwanda. I mean, they've even done tests in Rwanda of like people leaving their wallets on the sidewalk and filming to see what people do. People pick up the wallet and try to find who owns it and give it to the person. Like people aren't trying to just like take the money. And this is a country where people aren't like, the average person isn't wealthy. So you would think that they would be really gravelicious. You understand what I'm saying? To like just take the money. But there's videos been done on this about how honest people are in Rwanda. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, it's like, you just feel safer in those types of countries like a Singapore, Rwanda and El Salvador. You see what El Salvador did recently with the gangs. They had a big gang problem in El Salvador. And Nayib Bukele cracked down on all of them and said, we're just going to build jails for all of you. And having tattoos is illegal because it was the sign of the gangs. And he even made it that, like, if you get buried and you're a member of a gang, you have to be in an unmarked grave because you're not even going to be remembered. Like, this is how serious this is. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, these are things to look at. These are things to take seriously. But I just wanted to show people Singapore, and for people to actually do a little research of how countries get built. This is very important. You want to know how countries get built. How do they come out of desperation to prosperity? That's what I want people to be clear about. I know some people say they want to call in. Anybody who wants to call in, this would be the time to do that. The call-in number or the call-in link is on YouTube. It is pinned. It's a pinned comment. So all you have to do is just tap that and you can, call in. And on Facebook, it's there as well. If you go to, I think on Facebook, I can't do it as a pinned comment, but it is put it in the most relevant, and you'll see me as the author of the thread giving you the link. So you'll be able to see that link as well. And feel free to tap in and let's chop it up about Singapore, man, and the history that we just saw. Is very, very important that we know about this. When we talk about nation building, we have to study people who have been successful at nation building. It's just that simple. How many people today tuned in, and this is the first time you heard about Lee Kuan Yew? Lowell said this is his first time hearing about him. And it won't be the last, because it's someone who needs to be studied. Not that he was perfect and everything he did was perfect, but most of what he did worked. And looking at these policies makes you understand that, like, America is not the only place you should know about. And it shouldn't be your only option. And that's what we do to ourselves is that, or whatever country you're living in, you don't know the quality of life of other places if you don't know about other places. It might turn out that you're spending your time in a country where you're not getting the most out of life. You understand what I'm saying? You can go to a country where you pay less taxes, worry less about crime, your children get a better education for the dollar, you get better food for the dollar, you get better pay for your time. You understand what I'm saying? So these are things to look into, y'all. And of course, I'm gonna promote Africa, of course, but I also want to be fair that you see what's going on in other parts of the world, so at least can inform your African experience. Because when I go to different parts in Africa, I know what the standard should be, right? So when I go to Ghana and I see that things ain't what it should be, I'm very clear. Well, Singapore makes it easy to do business, and that's why Singapore has the economy that it has. If you make it difficult for your entrepreneurs to do business like Ghana does, I told you all, just to get a business license in Ghana, it took me $200 and 7 months. And I had to hire an accountant. Rwanda followed Singapore's policy by making business registration free and able to do online, right? And so because of that, Rwanda is able to register businesses at a much higher rate than Ghana. If it took me 7 months in Ghana, but literally 12 hours for my first business, and then I did 4 businesses that I registered over a course of 48 hours, and all of them were registered for free. What do you think is going to happen in terms of the velocity of money for Rwanda versus Ghana? Ghana is not going to be able to compete with Rwanda because Ghana is making it too difficult for people to do business. And I know people who've left. I know two women who are business people. One is a resort owner and one is a chiropractor. They both left Ghana and are now situated in Rwanda. Why? Because it's easier to do business in Rwanda. And there's less crime. And the government is less corrupt. And it's cleaner. And it's more advanced. And the roads are better. You know what I mean? Like all of these ands start adding up. And what you're going to start seeing is a lot of these countries that refuse to keep up and refuse to compete, people are going to leave your countries in favor of countries where they can thrive. This has been going on from time immemorial, but you're actually seeing it inside of Africa in non-refugee situations. So people have always migrated because of like droughts or wars, but people are actually migrating from peaceful country to peaceful country just based on what the economic opportunity is in Africa now. So a lot of Africans are not choosing to go to Britain or the United States for opportunity. They're choosing to go to places like Botswana, like Nigerians and Ghanaians. They're leaving their countries because their countries ain't got the whole entrepreneur thing, regulations like favorable enough, and they'll go to Rwanda and live there. I met Ghanaians in Rwanda who said, I'm not leaving. I met Nigerians there who said, I'm not leaving. Like, why would I leave? You know what I'm saying? My good brother, Olaroon, you know, from Niger, you know, rep Niger hard, but he came to Rwanda. He was my neighbor. Brother, you know, he brought his family. He stayed a couple months. He was my neighbor. And I'm talking to him. He's a Niger man, and he's basically like, yo, compared to Nigeria, you know, it's Rwanda all day long because of the ease of actually moving around and doing business and just seeing the government. Like, it's a no-brainer. And so it's a competition now for African spaces that make sense for African people. And this is what's happening right now. And we got a good brother, Tanisio, in the hit house.
Greetings, brother. How you doing, man?
I'm on top of the world. How are you, man?
Yes, sir. Everything is excellent, excellent. And really enjoyed today's broadcast, man. Very educational, quite apropos. We know who we're being led and taught by here, man. So you showed and proved once again, brother.
Yeah. I mean, this show is for people like you, bro. People like you and me who are really serious and want to have adult conversations. You understand what I'm saying? Like, we're serious because we're trying to figure this thing out for our people, and we need to be able to look at proofs of concept and case studies. And there's nothing better than to look at people who've already been successful, taking a place from a swamp to what it is now. This has to be studied.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, no, you're spot on. I mean, those who, you know, are familiar with the works of Black farmers, if you will, most of us, you know, throughout the years have been limited in doing more of the groundwork. But a lot of that grunt work related to policy, related to advocacy, we're starting to enter into that space for the very reason that you're talking about, is that we can continue to point fingers, you know, at Monsanto or Bayer or Dow. But we've got to be the ones to figure out the name of the game and then create the change. And, you know, I bring that up because, as you know, I've worked in the municipal sector, you know, as a director of urban agriculture for a city here in Metro Atlanta. And to your very point, it's given me such an eye-opening understanding of where a lot of the problems lie. And yet most of the time my comrades are just pointing fingers. I'm like, no, we got to get into some of these spots, learn the game so that we can change things around. And, you know, I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily reformist, but you sometimes do have to put your ideologies to the side and learn, you know, what you're up against so that then you can create an intersectionality between how you ideally want to live, but also couple that with the reality of the factors that exist. And so to your point, sometimes there's some compromises, but those compromises have some long-term sustainability that we really have to start to ask ourselves, are we serious enough to push through some of these acute situations to get the chronic benefits, if you will?
Right. And also what I've learned too, Tanisio, is that like none of us, myself, especially myself, this is a message really to myself, is that I don't have the luxury or even the right or the privilege to be arrogant about any of my ideological beliefs, because I have not fully solved this problem for our people. Like I have not been successful in doing something like what Lee Kuan Yew has done. So because I have not been successful in solving this problem once and for all for our people, you have to be flexible in your ideas and non-arrogant in your approach, because none of us have completely cracked this puzzle of what we want Africa to be, right? We want to have a continent that we call home, that we prefer to be in over any other space on earth where we're thriving, right? That's what we want. And so because we've got a long way to go, we've got to get our manufacturing base together. We've got to get our engineers together. We've got to get our capital together. Until we're doing that, none of us are in a position to act like know-it-alls. We're just not there yet. And this is something I have to remind myself, because, when you're young, you feel like you know everything. And when you start learning about our people, our culture, you get dogmatic in your ways and your approach, but then you're not seeing results around you. Like if we know so much, why aren't we doing so much?
That's right.
Right. And even what you talked about earlier, you might not even recognize what you were saying, but because I don't think you saw the other live, but we did another live with a sister called Maguette Wade. And Maguette Wade is a sister out of Senegal, and she has a lot to say about African development. It's very profound. And so we did a deep dive into her thoughts and her thought patterns and what she had to say. She's a dynamic sister. She has a manufacturing business in Senegal, but she talks about entrepreneurs being able to thrive in Africa and how the regulations are basically draconian and they're archaic. And that's what's stopping Africa from actually developing wealth. And one of her sayings is criticize by creating. And you mentioned that. You talked about criticizing and creating, and I was like, the brother didn't even see. I don't even think he saw the sister, but you speaking just like her. Yes, criticize by creating. We don't criticize by just criticizing. No, if you know better and you're gonna criticize, then you need to create something better.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? But now that I got you on, man, there's rumors that you might be doing a show.
Yeah, I could see that forthcoming.
What would it be about? What would you be focusing on?
Well, I have an educational curriculum that I do in person here in the Metro Atlanta area called Garden Like a Boss. And so the whole purpose of that is to really elevate people's level into the mindset really of how farmers operate. There's a lot of, we'll just say tactics, understandings of the game, if you will, that farmers know, that oftentimes, especially in urban environments, small scale growers don't know about. Just to tease, your audience with one example, you can get what's known as a farm tract number. Of course, Heru, you and I have talked about this before. And that farm tract number is a number that identifies the piece of land that you're using for growing as an actual farm based upon the USDA standards. That farm tract number has two benefits. Number one, you can actually get the portions of your property that you're using to grow on reduced down to an agricultural tax rate, right? So in some of these cities where we've felt the onslaught of gentrification and Ms. Johnson might get, taxed out of her property, what I've said to, citizens is, well, hey, if Ms. Johnson is also out there growing some tomatoes, she might want to put that farm tract number on that and reduce her tax burden. And now the onslaught of development won't push her out of her home. But also, to get that farm tract number, all the USDA wants to see you grow on is a minimum of 1/100th of an acre.
Right.
So we're talking about a 2-car garage.
Yeah, that's crazy because you can grow in pots as well.
That's it. And so people oftentimes think, well, I got to have all this land. I've got to be, land wealthy. And obviously we're encouraging our people to get as much land as possible. They're not making any more. But don't think that you are out of the range of benefit if you have small pots, literally, right? Or if you have small plots, if you have an apartment complex, whatever you can leverage to be able to get those farm tract numbers, I try to encourage people to do so. Again, ideology versus, the reality. Am I a proponent for the federal government, and all the things that they could potentially have power over me for related to my land? No. But am I also tired of, having those who control my food control me? Yes.
Right.
So at some point you got to weigh, what things are most important for the time being. And so that's just an example of the kind of things we'll talk about as I bring this more brick and mortar curriculum into the web space. So haven't gotten my dates yet on when I'll start the show. So I'll definitely make sure I come on board when I'm ready to inform your audience. But yeah, it's going to be a program called Garden Like a Boss. And we're just going to go deep into understanding all these intricacies of the agricultural sector, because I'll close with this. Agriculture is much bigger than just growing food, y'all. We have to be very clear. The agricultural departments, or the ministries, if you will, are typically one of your largest funded departments of any government, federal, state, county. And so when you look at the powers that the, let's say, Secretary of Ag has, or a Commissioner of Ag has, they cover things like fuels and measures. They cover ports. When you talk about Singapore, at least in the United States and in the state of Georgia in particular, it's the Commissioner of Agriculture who's the authority over the port, right? So, fuels and measures, that's petroleum, textiles. There's a lot more things that are involved in agriculture than just the growing of food. So we're going to get into a lot of that to really catch our people up to speed.
Yeah, and this is really important, y'all, because people like Tanisio, who kind of soaked me with that agricultural financial gain piece, I started doing some more research on the laws for Florida. And so when I started growing the mango orchard, I was able to get the land that I live on, where I'm growing the orchard, designated as an agricultural exemption. And because of that, I'm paying about 10% of the taxes in terms of property taxes that I would have to pay. So basically, you're paying less taxes for growing food. Growing your own food, you're paying less taxes. So you're being rewarded for growing food and even selling it to your neighbors or to the general public. So this is a very important conversation to have, particularly for those who own any property and own any land. Why own land and pay property taxes every year at 100% when you can cut it down to a very small percentage just because you're growing food? And like Tanisio said, depending on what state you live in, looking at the laws, you just might need a few pots here and there to grow the food. So you don't even have to worry about winter time or anything. You can keep the pots indoors and just have it there. They come to do an agricultural inspection. You got the pots ready to show them you're growing tomatoes, you're growing carrots, you're growing yam, you're growing onions, you're growing ginger. This is what you're using any day anyway. So you might as well use it in a way that's going to have you saving more money and not giving money to the government. And all of this is legal, by the way.
That's right.
All of this is legal. So I look forward to that show, Gardening Like a Boss, because what he's talking about is the science of gardening and then the economics of gardening. So I look forward to a show like that. It's very much needed, man. People talk about growing your own food and, food security and all that. But there's never been, well, I won't say never, but there's very few people talking about the step-by-step process in how to maximize your returns on every single thing that you do agriculturally. You know what I'm saying? Like even just now, like a couple weeks ago, I was just playing around with the tax code in terms of what you can use as a write-off. And it became clear to me that you could use groceries as a tax write-off if you're using your groceries for making compost.
Right.
Right? You need the groceries for compost, and you need the compost for your garden that you are selling. All you got to do is just show that you're selling a few tomatoes to XYZ person, and you've got a business now. And so now all of your groceries can be written off as a tax write-off for agricultural compost. So as part of your business, a necessary expense for your business activities. And so you can write all of those off on your taxes. And so if you understand these things, if you're in America and you're buying groceries, as long as you can show that you're making some compost with it and you have a garden or fruit trees, you're good to go. So this is the type of thing that we're going to be talking about. We're talking about gaming the system in a legal way.
Yep.
We're on a chessboard, but we don't understand the games involved in chess. We don't understand that a knight can only move a certain way and a queen can move a certain way and a bishop can move certain ways. We need to understand these things so we can stop getting checkmated and acting like brand new that we're getting checkmated. You're getting checkmated because you don't know the rules of the game that we're playing. So your show is going to be a very important piece of the puzzle, man. I look very forward to it, bro.
Yeah, most certainly, man. Give thanks for the inspiration, the encouragement to do it. And yeah, like I said, as soon as we're ready for liftoff, I will come back here and let you all know all about it.
What type of services do you provide? Like if people were interested in like growing a garden, would they be able to call you for consultation? Even if they're in different parts of the world, we might be able to consult them over Zoom or what have you, or having a fruit orchard.
I've had a few experiences doing remote consultations. You know, you can use GIS software like Google Earth, and as long as the property is visible within that space, then yeah, I can definitely provide you know, the type of support that I would do for someone on ground. But even if it's just, you know, ones want to be able to pick my brain and ask questions, I'm available. So they can always reach me at Nature's Candy Farms on Instagram and or Facebook. Also, my email address is naturescandyfarms@gmail.com. So nature's possessive and farms plural, meaning an S on the end of both of those words. And just hit me up and I'll be more than happy to help out.
Well, I think some folks are going to hit you up. We got Healing Beauty Rituals Daily saying bet. So I think you will get hit up for your advice on growing food, man. There's nothing better than that. And food tastes better when you grow it yourself. You know what I'm saying?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, man. And how long you been doing this, man?
So I personally have been involved in the agricultural sector since 2011. But my family is proud to be Centurion landowners here in the United States. So we've had agriculture in the family since 1882.
Okay.
So we have a plot of land that we have consistently owned since 1882.
Nice.
So, you know, a lot of that was the motivation for me to get involved. You know, when my father was alive, he was always talking to me about, you know, making sure that I don't forget that connection to the family land. You know, they would take us to go visit it. And then I learned of some uncles that were, you know, actively involved in agriculture. So I always knew at some point I would get into it, didn't know to what extent. But funny enough, I actually moved to Nigeria in 2008. And then when I came back from that stay there, you know, I really said to myself, like, okay, I've now seen a country in the continent, and I got to figure out a way to play my role. So I had gone back to college and actually gotten a degree in green enterprise management, thinking I was going to get into energy management. However, again, that exposure to agriculture kind of crept up on me simultaneously, and I went that direction. I haven't looked back. I've ran my own farm, worked for farms, worked for nonprofits, worked for city government. And now I'm back on the independent front. So yeah, anybody who will talk to me, I can tell them about real world experience. This isn't textbook. You know, I've got some scars on my face and on my hands to prove that I've been in this work.
Let me ask you a question, man. What do you like to grow the most?
You know, I always get that question, and I feel like it changes a lot. So my go-to crop right now is actually Swiss chard.
Swiss chard grows pretty fast.
It grows fast, but it's extremely durable to different weather conditions. It doesn't do as well during the heat, which most greens don't. But whenever I have a stand of greens, it could be kale, collards, Swiss chard, cabbages. Swiss chard always holds up. So I have a stand of Swiss chard at my farm right now that's been growing for 18 months.
Nice.
And it still handles all the different weather conditions that we have in our geographic region, which is we're in zone 8A. So it's starting to get a little bit warmer here. But yeah, I love that from the side of, like, we'll say annual crops. Now, really what I love growing, and I'm trying to get back to it, is growing plums.
Plums.
So plums, you know, you can grow a single plum tree and expect to get a yield, depending on the variety that you grow, of about 8,000 to 12,000 plums.
Damn.
And so
on one tree.
On one tree.
Blood fire.
So I discovered that in 2019 when a tree that I had planted had finally started to get to a level of maturity. And I had been selling the plums in these little small clamshells, you know, just like you get, you know, raspberries or strawberries. I put plums in there. I was able to sell 8,000 of them. And then I ended up taking a trip overseas right in the middle of the season. It had already been planned, and I didn't necessarily expect that they were going to align like that. And there was still like another fourth of the fruit left on the tree.
Okay, I didn't know that. I didn't know that plums were that voracious, man.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
plums are extremely productive. Everybody loves them.
Right.
Um,
That's the thing about fruit trees, man. Fruit trees, I prefer
Yeah.
fruit trees over growing vegetables. You know
All
what I'm saying?
day.
All
All
day
day.
long, because they don't require as much care.
That's right.
And when they're ready to reap, it's serious. Like,
That's right.
it's very serious.
You can't eat it all. You can't even
No.
sell it all, honestly. You just
Yeah.
do as best as you can, and then the rest of it goes to nature. But yeah, no, I was able to see the potential in an orchard of plums. I didn't have an orchard; it was a single tree. But ever since then, I've been planting plum trees at different locations, and so a few of them are getting to the point to where they're starting to give their first yield. And normally with a tree like that, you don't want to harvest its first yield. You let that yield just kind of do what it's going to do, because it's going to be very low volume.
Right.
And then you prune it well enough to where it can hold the weight, because when that second year comes, it's going to be full. It's going to be heavy.
Right.
And that tree that I speak of, actually, the reason I don't have access to it anymore is I had sold the home. Seems to be a trend of mine, right? Heru, he knows why I say that. But anyway, the tree didn't get maintained by the next property owner, but I went back to check on it. That tree's yield had gotten so heavy, it split the tree in half.
Oh, wow.
At the trunk. So, I mean, this is how much yield it was producing, is that the tree's own infrastructure couldn't even hold the weight of that much fruit. So you have to just, of course, manicure it, make sure that it can do what it needs to do and not destroy its own self. But that's how much fruit it made. So.
Yeah. We have a comment. Thank you for the info, good brothers. In Chicago, we just planted 142 pots of food, including microgreens and flowers in our backyard. And we have a composting setup. Exactly.
Awesome.
So the next thing you want to do, Healing Beauty, is to see what type of property tax exemptions you can get for growing food. And that way you don't have to pay property taxes on that house as much as you're paying. So that's just the next step of that, because 142 pots is a nice amount of pots there.
And Chicago's very ag friendly. I have a few comrades up in that area that definitely, if you ever needed to connect with somebody, I could probably point you towards some people in your local area.
Yeah. So this is what this show is about, is just connecting each other with practical solutions for making our lives better in terms of making money and saving money, right? Because those are two ways of developing wealth, is making money and saving money, right? And most of us, we're throwing away money every year by paying property taxes that we could actually convert to savings if we just grow our own food. So how about that, right? That's another challenge. So I threw a challenge out yesterday to those. One of the challenges that I threw out yesterday was everybody should know a place in Africa that they have directions to from the airport, right? Because we talk about Africa, but we talk about the ancient Africa, but like we act, some of us act like Africa don't exist, like right now, like it's not a real place. And so my challenge to the people is, when you go to Africa, you need to know a place that you know how to get to from the airport without anyone giving you directions.
That's right.
With your own memory, because then that gives you more of a sense of home and a more of a sense of ownership of the continent, because you at least know one place that you know the directions to.
That's amazing you say that, man. I mean, just like you were talking about the serendipity of my comment, I've told people that before. Like, they're like, well, how long did you live there? And I'm like, I still live there. And I specifically say that because I know exactly how to do what you said. I know how to get out of the airport in Lagos, go all the way down 3rd Mainland Bridge and end up in the island if I need to. Or I could go to Palm Grove Estate and I would not need a single person. I wouldn't need anybody.
That's when Africa becomes real to you, when you know the directions. Of how to get there. Once you get to the airport, you will tell the driver how to get there.
That's right.
That's when Africa becomes real to you. So it was a challenge that I threw out for all my listeners. In the next 365 days, everyone should know directions to some place in Africa without help. to be able to recognize the neighborhood. And Healing Beauty Ritual says to you, I would love the connections, dear heart. So what you could do, Healing Rituals, is you go to my Facebook and just look up Tenicio in my Facebook and then inbox him there. So just go to my friends list on my Facebook, and then you'll see Tenicio, and then just hit him up, or hit him up with the link that he just told you about in terms of his email address and the website. You had a website as well, right?
I actually am redeveloping mine, so it's down. I don't know if this email address I just put in this chat is just for us or if it's seen by everybody else.
Okay, I see it there, naturescandyfarms@gmail.com.
Yes.
I'm going to put it in the chat right now because I think are you watching this on Facebook or YouTube?
Originally, I was watching it on Facebook.
Okay, so for the folks on YouTube, I'm going to post this Tenicio's contact, and then I put it there. All right, y'all should be able to see it on YouTube in the comments.
Yeah, but
So
all of this is training, y'all. I mean, even me, getting involved, like I say, with municipal government. I've never been, one who's been a huge proponent for electoral politics in the U.S. for the obvious reasons. It's two wings of the same bird.
Right.
However, I knew that, okay, if I do plan to be effective in my relations with the continent in particular, it'd be good to just learn the game. And so that was really one of the biggest motivators for me in even getting involved with local politics is I knew at some point it would direct me towards the continent. And so I've had actually conversations, at least with one official from the Nigerian government, or someone who's connected to the government. This individual is not an actual appointee or a politician, but still just knowing that the expertise that I've developed over here can be of benefit to our homeland was a, definitely a huge victory for me. And knowing now that, as I continue to develop that and continue to build with people like Brother Heru and the individuals, watching tonight, we are going to win, y'all. You win just by fighting. So we've already won just because we continue to fight. And we just have to keep fighting and make sure that we keep our eye on the prize.
Absolutely. And what are your plans? You plan to ever go back to Nigeria?
Yeah, I mean, really, I am now in a state where I am literally taking a lot of the sites that you've already recommended and I'm putting them on my checklist of places I want to go. Nigeria is always going to be home just because that's the first stop I ever made on the continent.
And I know you got lifelong friendships from the time you were there. I know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those places where I tell people all the time, if you want your crash course on the entire continent of Africa, go to Lagos.
Yep, Lagos.
You want to learn everything that's beautiful and crazy.
He's not
about
lying.
the continent, you go to Lagos.
He's not lying. Lagos, Nigeria.
That's gangster's paradise. But
Yeah,
it's also paradise too, all at the same time.
Yep. That's Africa. It's hard to put into words the truth of what Tenicio is saying about Nigeria, but literally, Nigerians are black plus tax. So it's like everything about our people that you love, you're gonna see it in Nigeria.
Right.
Everything about our people that you might not love, you're gonna see it in Nigeria. You know what I mean? But basically, probably has the highest concentration of high octane Africans anywhere in the world, man. I'm talking about high octane in so many different aspects of life. And then their use of language and the way they tell stories and their personalities will have you laughing all day long, man. Very vibrant people, man. And the best dressed people in Africa.
Oh, man.
Right?
Can't beat them. Yeah.
Right? Just on the streets of Lagos, there'd be somebody begging you money and they wearing nicer clothes than you.
They got an up down on.
They're asking you for money. I'm like, wait, I should be asking you for money. Look at what you got on, man.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, it's crazy, man.
That's true.
Like people won't know that until you actually go Lagos. Lagos is crazy. It's a crazy place, but the fact is it's essentially ungoverned territory. That the fact that it runs so smoothly to be an ungoverned territory. And what I mean by ungoverned is like laws are only suggestions there. You know what I'm saying? Like the law is just a suggestion. You know
It's
what
like
I mean?
I remember when I was last there, they passed a law for the Okata to wear helmets. You know, for those who don't know, Okata is the motorcycle taxis.
Mm-hmm.
The helmets guys would start to wear were 5-gallon paint buckets.
Yeah. This is what you're gonna see.
So I just have to have something.
I have something on my head.
I put a 5-gallon paint bucket.
A paint bucket. You see people riding around with a paint bucket. It's crazy, right? Yeah, Nigeria, man. I saw things in Nigeria I never dreamt I would ever see in humanity, man. Like I saw things. I seen
parlor
people on,
tricks.
man. I seen people on top of a truck so high, like you would think that everything was gonna fall off the truck, the way things were stacked up. But then you'll see a brother sitting on top of the stack with the truck running. It's just crazy, man. I've seen the craziest things in Lagos, man.
Look, we keep pit bulls in the United States. Them dudes keep hyenas on chains over there.
Yeah, they keep hyenas on chains.
That thing's
just
a
walking
beast.
around
That's
like
not
it's
a dog. People don't understand. That thing is a beast. Its shoulders are up to like your chest.
It's crazy, man. I've seen the craziest things, man, in Lego. I got so many Lego stories. One day we'll do a show just about Lego stories, man.
Okay, let's do it. I might be able to top you, but I know you're an adventurous man.
I got stories, man. I got stories, man. We're gonna do
good ones.
Yeah. We'll have Olaroon calling too. We do a show just on Legos, man.
There we go.
Legos deserves its own show, right?
Yes, it does. Yeah, man.
Oh man, Legos, you gotta love it.
You can see from me rubbing my eyes, I need to go ahead and hit this sack, brother. But
man.
Really appreciate what you're doing, man.
Man. Give thanks, man. Always good to see you, man. And feel free to tune in anytime and let us know. Let the audience know whenever you go live, because I'm definitely gonna be tuned into your show.
Will do, man.
Yeah, man.
All right, brother. Power.
Peace. All right, y'all. Y'all just saw from the great Tanisio, the powerful Tanisio. And I hope that the show was inspirational. And if it was, you know how we do. Run the Cash apps if you felt like this was empowering in any way whatsoever. If you don't have money for Cash app, go ahead and just send a message and say that you enjoyed the show. What it does, it gives me a gauge of the effectiveness of what we're doing here. We want to make this practical. We want to make it entertaining, and we want to make it I'm only doing this show for people who are intellectually curious, right? This doesn't work for people who don't have intellectual curiosity, because we're going to be like diving deep into certain personalities and certain modes of thought, but really based on people who've accomplished results in different areas of life, whether it be health, whether it be economics, whether it be nation building, whether it be politics, whether it be science and engineering. Everything that I'm talking about is not theory, it is practical based on results. And so tomorrow we're going to do Nayib Bukele of El Salvador. I would advise everyone to tune in, because I've got some footage of what happened recently with Nayib Bukele and what he did with the executive branch of his country is absolutely incredible. What happened recently in El Salvador. I'll talk about my time in El Salvador. We're going to go over an interview with Nayib Bukele, because it's important for you to know who the leaders are in this world who are actually transforming their countries in a very profound way. Because we need to know this as people who live in the world, and we need to be able to take these successes. For those of us who want to help and develop Africa, we are open for suggestions from anyone around the world, because the earth is a big place and we're just looking for the best practices and the best results to affect our countries and our societies. And so it would be remiss not to cover Nayib Bukele. And I'm going to walk you through like flying there, like when I booked a ticket, when I flew, why I did it. You know, it's because Bitcoin was made legal tender, and then the surprise I got when I got there around the pandemic, and then my time there. And then we're going to do what I saw. I have some interviews from there as well. I'll share some video interviews that I did with people in El Salvador. And then we're going to share some interviews with Nayib Bukele so you can get inside his mind. And when we start to understand these people, we understand that it's a special class of leaders who are really about developing their people. And we get to also find out that there is a science to the development of a population. And once we get clear on this science, we're able to identify leaders who ain't serious right away. This is the key. Like, you can go to any country, and if you see certain things, you'll be like, oh, this leader's not serious, because he doesn't understand that, like, one, you have to clean your country if you're going to make it economically prosperous. Other words, there shouldn't be any problems with your waste management. If you've got garbage all over the place, like, I went to Philadelphia once, and I've never seen a dirtier city than Philadelphia. I was downtown Philadelphia, and I saw, there was trash flying all over the place. Like, literally paper trash all over, like in the sky. That's how bad it was in Philadelphia. And so then I already know that this place is not going to be economically prosperous until the mayor and the public works officials deal with their problem around waste management. No one wants to invest in a place that cannot solve its waste management issues. In certain African countries you go to, they have waste management issues. And we know that the leaders aren't serious, because you can't blame anybody about waste management than you. You can't blame that on colonialism. You can't blame that on imperialism. No, you need to learn how to clean your country. And if you can't, you need to step aside and allow other people who know how to do it. And if they can do it in Rwanda, where you don't see any garbage anywhere, it can certainly be done in every single country, including Jamaica, including Haiti, including Barbados, including Virgin Islands, including Philadelphia, including Ghana, including any of these spaces that we're in. There are examples of waste management being done in a very, very serious way. And I have all types of ideas that I've shared with different African leaders. Some of them didn't take it seriously, but I've gone so far as to share newspaper clippings. So for instance, like, it's either Sweden or Norway, one of those Scandinavian countries, for the train, to take the train, you could either pay to take the train, or you can submit recyclable garbage. That's your fare. So what they have is they have a place where you dump your plastic bottles, and that is your fee to ride the train. You could do that or pay. And what happens is that all the trash that is dumped in that spot, when the train closes, in terms of picking up passengers, let's say 1 a.m., they have another train that comes to take cars full of the trash that was dumped that day as an entrance fee, and then brought to a recyclable site. So what happens is you've got people bringing their trash. Instead of having it in their house, you got to pick it up from house to house. You now have a central location, which is the bus station or the train station, where people are bringing in their plastic trash as a fee to get into the train. And all of that trash is in one spot, and then it goes to a central recycling place. But how convenient is that people actually bring their trash to you, and you close the car system for the trains when the train closes at 1 a.m. Now you open it back up, and you start moving the traffic along of the recycled trash, using the trains to do the same thing, because that's where people deposited the trash. And it's an ingenious system. And I, brought that system up to certain people in government, and they said, oh, wow, that sounds great. And they just, whatever, nothing happened. My idea was actually for students to bring the trash to school as a part of tuition fees. So what would happen is that you'd have children from the neighborhood have a quota of trash they have to collect. And in exchange for that, they get free education. And the reason why is that if you find out the cost of trash is actually like the cost of trash, the health implications and the multiples in terms of cleaning up trash and trash getting stuck in gutters and having overflow causing malaria, the cost of having out of control trash would be greater than what you're spending on your budget for education. And so what you do is that you can actually have the trash be a form of tuition. And then you have a central place to pick it up, which would be the schools. Every child has to bring in, let's say, a pound of plastic trash, and you're able to recycle it and use the schools as the place where you pick up the trash in a recycling regime. So, I brought all this up and I worked it out, and I got the idea from what they were doing in Sweden on the trains. But, the leaders of the country said, that's a great idea, man, da, da, da. But a lot of them will just give you lip service and you don't see anything get done. I mean, I got ideas for days, but this is all just based on being able to travel the world and see what's going on and to basically just steal great ideas. Sometimes the best leader is not necessarily the person who comes up with original ideas. Is usually the person who knows what's going on in other parts of the world where people have been successful. They just steal the idea. And the thing is, it's not an idea that is copyright or trademarked by anybody. It's just an idea to help a society, and you just absorb that idea and put it into your country and make it work for you and your people. My idea has been that every single African government and Caribbean government should have an office of innovation. That means that you have people whose only job is to find out how other people around the world have solved different problems. You find out and you give reports. So if you find that Australia has done something innovative in solving a certain problem, you bring it back to your country and then let your country try to solve the problem with those same tactics. And this should be the job of specific people. There should be an office dedicated to this. And they should be on YouTube all day long, and they should be traveling to certain places to find out how people have solved healthcare issues, traffic issues, waste management issues, certain economic issues, engineering issues, dams. What's the best way to actually take care of potholes? What's the best way to deal with ambulance services? This should be studied, and you should be getting the best out of all the different countries in the world and just taking the best, sifting out the best, and bring it into your country to implement. There should be an office of innovation, and there should be a minister of innovation who's on top, and should not be like that person should never be dumbfounded if I ask them, have you heard of Bitcoin? Have you heard? You understand what I'm saying? They should be on top of everything. Like they should know about vertical wind farms. Like they should know about 3D printing. They should be lecturing me, not me lecturing them. And that's how you know. Like I shouldn't be the one with all the ideas coming into these countries that they'd never heard of. And a lot of times when you go into these places, they're like, oh, I never heard of this. And please tell me more. And it's like, what are you doing? You're getting paid a salary to actually be in charge of these problems. And you're telling me you haven't heard of X, Y, Z, which lets you know that people ain't serious, So this is a beautiful show today. I hope that y'all got a lot out of it, as usual, that y'all got value and you got some more understanding of Singapore. And now the name Lee Kuan Yew is a name you'll never forget. You can do your own further research on him. There's longer documentaries, but because I'm doing a show, I don't want to just play a documentary all the way through. It needs to be commentary, needs to be contextual analysis and all of that. But I think that a lot of you all got value from the messages that I'm getting from this show. And tomorrow we're going to continue with Nayib Bukele, and y'all don't want to miss tomorrow. When I show y'all what he's done in the short amount of time that he's done, you're just going to be like, wow, it is a question of leadership. There's a leader, the proper leader can change a country in 1 to 2 years faster than most leaders in most governments have done in 20. We've seen it. We've seen it. Most of the public works projects that were done of any note were done by Kwame Nkrumah till this day. You have Tema, you have the Kosombo Dam. This was done by Kwame Nkrumah in the 60s. Since then, there haven't been real leaders doing serious public works projects since Nkrumah's time in Ghana. So it tells you, if you have dynamic leadership, it can put you ahead for 50 years. Imagine if you have that leadership for a whole 50 years, what can be done to a country in terms of the advancement. So this is where I want us to be, for us to start thinking about these things and seeing the examples of success and winning stories. You know, we can't be watching losing stories all of our lives. We have to see who's winning, why they won, and how we can implement winning strategies, because I like being a winner. It feels good to be a winner. It just feels better. Life is better when you're winning. So you have to surround yourself with winning stories, winning examples, winning people, and you start getting winning results. So that's what this is about. This whole podcast I'm doing is how we can win. Share my wins with you, share where I went wrong, and everyone else can share their wins too. And it'll be a community of winners. I don't care if it's just 4 or 5 of us, or 400 to 500,000 of us. I know I'm gonna keep winning. You understand what I'm saying? Because I don't, nothing else makes sense. So that's why I'm focused on winners all the time. So tomorrow, I will go through how I curate my feed for Twitter that gives me a cheat code in the realms of finance, engineering, science, physics, economics, investing. I get all of the hot information quick because of the people that I follow. So it's about curating your content, man. So thank you all for tuning in. It's been beautiful. We're at 11:30. Great show. Thank you, Tanisio, for calling in. Thank you for all your comments for the people who tuned in. Have a beautiful rest of your evening. Sleep well. Wake up good. Conquer the day tomorrow. Join us again at 8 o'clock. We'll be doing Nayib Bukele and the question of El Salvador's rise in economic strength and what he's implemented and how he did it. So it's going to be very, very interesting. And I'll talk about my time there as well. And to close out, again, the Cash App is $Herbal Results. Nothing is done without finance. And so if you enjoyed this, like you enjoy Netflix or whatever you pay to see, if you want to shoot some money this way, $1, $100, whatever it is that you can afford, this keeps us going. And we are here to win. And thank you for being winners who are interested in winning. Thank you all. Big up. See y'all tomorrow. Bless.